Hello, Cassie.
Good evening. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Pretty good.
So I'll be ready whenever you guys tell me to go.
Okay, and I've already shared my screen, so you should be good to go.
Okay, so you want to show the slides rather than letting me show them?
No, I'm just saying I shared my, you have the availability to.
Oh, perfect.
Yes.
That is terrific.
You do the slides. I just sit here.
Well, you know, it saves time
Yes,
if I can
ma'am.
do the slides. It does save time. So very good. Well, I'm ready whenever we're ready. Okay, thanks.
Yes, ma'am. I'll be right back.
Okay.
Good evening, Mayor.
Good evening. How are you?
Good. How are you doing? Good evening, Doctor. How are you doing?
Oh, I'm great. I hope everybody else is too.
Good. Thank you.
Evening, Chris.
Evening, how are y'all?
Great.
Good evening. How are you doing, Chris?
I'm great. How are you, Miss Baldwin?
Good. Good.
Good.
Y'all are awfully quiet.
I was just admiring Kyle's standby picture.
You prefer that? I
And you are quite stone-faced.
Yeah. Mhm.
Give Jay and John a minute here.
We have a few links sent to the board for the regular meeting and the closed session, so hopefully everybody's going through the right one. But
Right. To this one, then one go into close, and then the one come out of close.
correct.
I think on that, the coming out of close, we should come back to this meeting, right? So everybody
Right.
has it for
We have to
adjournment.
come back to this to close up the meeting.
There should only be two.
Yeah, I know Cassie and I were talking about trying to figure out what's the best way to do that, because technically you're going back to open session, but it's, you know, the Zoom world has kind of made that more convoluted than not, to have everyone kind of enter back into the room, a little different in a virtual world than a physical world. So, but I guess for anybody listening in, there typically isn't any business handled after that. It's just kind of go back in so we can formally close it. But
Evening, Jay.
Hey, sorry about that. Good to see everybody.
Hello, friends.
Hello. Hello.
Thank you. All right. I think we're all here. So I'll call to order the regular meeting of the Pittsburgh Board of Commissioners for October 12th, 2020. And as our custom, we'll begin our meeting with a moment of silence. Okay. Jay, would you lead us in a Pledge of Allegiance, please?
Certainly. Would everyone rise? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you.
Thank you, Jay. Okay. Next would be the adoption of the agenda. And of course, later we will approve the consent agenda or move something off of it. But I would entertain a motion to approve the agenda.
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
All right. Very good. Well, the first order of business this evening is to have a presentation from Dr. Birnbaum. We're so appreciative of her being here and being able to share with us her research and her understanding and her expertise in the area of water quality. So, Doctor, I'll turn it over to you, and welcome and thank you.
Well, thank you. I'm really happy to be here. I hope, can everyone see the slides now?
Yes.
Yes.
Great. Okay. Well, first of all, thank you for having me. I live just up the road in Chapel Hill. Lived here for 41 years, so I am very much invested in part of the communities around here. And what I really was hoping to do today is pretty quickly go through some of what we know about PFAS, the health effects. I know that you all have been introduced repeatedly to some issues about PFAS, but I really want to be sure we have time that I can answer questions for you. So just to remind you that PFAS are per and polyfluoroalkyl substances, and you're not going to have a lot of chemistry tonight. I actually have on this side greater than 5,000 chemicals. That really is an underestimate. We now know that EPA says there are well over 7,000 distinct PFAS, and many of these are intentionally produced. Some of them are impurities or they're breakdown products. Much stuff we have no idea what it is, other than it is a per or polyfluoroalkyl substance. They're very useful compounds. They're resistant to grease and water and oil, and they are used, for example, as surfactants and stain repellents. And a major use, and in fact, a major reason that a lot of water is contaminated, not so much the Hall River, but certainly other water supplies, is because of the use of AFFF, which is aqueous firefighting foam, basically. What are the problems with these compounds? Well, many of them are extremely persistent, both in the environment and in people. Many of them are bioaccumulative. And one thing I didn't put up here, they are all very mobile, which means that they move throughout the environment. So never been used in the Arctic, these compounds, but the Arctic is highly contaminated, for example, by these chemicals because they've traveled there. Now, some of the PFOS and PFOA are some of the PFAS that we have the most information on, but there are now what are called short-chain PFAS, which are the two lower ones. And the important here is that we were told that these were going to be non-toxic and not so persistent. Some of them may not be that persistent in us, but they persist essentially infinitely in the environment. So just the only reason I'm showing you this lovely background chemistry slide is the fact that it just kind of gives you an idea of what these molecules look like. The green are the fluorine molecules and the gray are the carbons. And what you can see is that the chains can get longer and longer and longer, having more and more fluorines. And then occasionally you have some oxygens or sulfurs as well. But the point is these are all highly related in structure chemicals. And as I've already kind of mentioned, the problem is that these are extremely environmental persistent. The things like PFOA, PFOS, the short chains don't degrade environmentally, ever. And many of these can pass through wastewater treatment plants, and that's part of the problem that we're all dealing with related to the Haw. But the point is in the production of PFAS, certain things are just released into the environment. Certain things go into all kinds of consumer and industrial products. From the release into the environment, Some of them get into our food chain, whether it's fish swimming in the rivers that we then ingest, or because of the heavy use of PFAS in food packaging. In consumer products, it's on our clothes, on our carpets, on our shoes, on our umbrellas, you name it. And all of this can not only get into us, it gets into the environment, and you can have recycling going on. So what's the problem here? The problem is that every one of us has PFAS in our body. And this is true not only in the United States, but even in very remote regions of the world. For example, we know that some of our native Inuit peoples in Alaska are highly contaminated. We know, for example, that while PFOA and PFOS, the major producers had to agree to stop producing these in the 2000s, PFOS in 2002, PFOA by about 2013, I believe, the levels have come down, as you can just kind of look at the bars that you see here. But I think something that's really important to understand here is that it looks a little bit like it's leveling off. And that's because there's so much of this that just keeps recycling in the environment, even if it's not produced. And I should say that while, for example, in the US, we're not making PFOA, it's still being made heavily, for example, in China. Some of the other long chain traditional ones like PFDA, with D stands for DECA or 10, is a 10 carbon one. PFHXS is a 6 carbon sulfonated one. They haven't gone down at all. They're still in our bodies just the way they were quite a number of years ago. So nobody has to go memorize this laundry list of different effects. But the point is that there's a wide range of effects, both in animals and in people, that have been shown to be clearly associated with the PFOA and or PFOS. So several kinds of cancer, clearly both testicular and kidney cancer, ulcerative colitis, which is a type of irritable bowel syndrome, elevated cholesterol, preeclampsia, which is pregnancy-induced hypertension, and disruption of our thyroid hormones. There are also other hormonal changes that have been reported. We've got changes in liver functioning. There's an association with increased obesity. And I think one of the things that I'm going to just show you one or two slides on is immunotoxicity. There is quite a bit of data from several different human populations, as well as multiple species of rats, mice, and non-human primates, that exposure to the PFAS can suppress the ability to mount a healthy vaccination response. There's also data showing low birth weight and size, delays in puberty and decreased fertility and early menopause, effects on lower testosterone levels in males, increased prostate cancer, ovarian cancer, and a decrease in bone density. And that often is inversely related to the increase in obesity. So just a few slides, and not going to spend a lot of time on these, but the point is, if you look at these, here are 4 different chemicals, the PFOA with the C8, the PFOS, another C8, PFHXS, and PFNA, which is a C9. And what you can see is that in many cases, there is an increased risk. The increased risk, look at those center dots, which is an increased chance of having gestational diabetes in the mother. And we know that gestational diabetes in women is associated with an increased likelihood as they age of developing type 2 diabetes. We also know that exposure during pregnancy is associated with abnormal weight gain in the mothers. And so you have the straight line kind of in the bottom curve, which is saying that's what the weight gain normally is. And a woman who has higher PFOS levels has a more rapid weight gain. I should say this, we see exactly the same thing in experimental animal models. Another thing that we're seeing with PFAS, and remember I said that PFAS can disrupt our hormone systems, especially our thyroid systems. And what you see is that little boys tend to be smaller at birth, significantly smaller at birth, and depending on the amount of PFAS they have, and have a smaller head circumference. So again, we've known for a long time from other kinds of things like smoking, say mothers smoking, that smaller birth weight is associated with increased risk of many health concerns later on. And then I mentioned the immune effects and the suppression of the ability to mount a normal vaccination. And this is some data following a birth cohort where they measured the levels in the mothers during pregnancy, and then they measured the children. This is an example when the kids were 7 years of age. And what you can see is the ability of the kids to respond by developing a adequate antibody titer to diphtheria or tetanus, and it's reduced in both cases. And I should say this has been shown at kids at 5 years, at 7 years, at 13 years of age. And there is now data also showing that these kinds of effects are related to higher rate of infections in children and more in temperature and more hospitalizations as well. So I've mentioned, and I'm just quickly going to go over that the thyroid function, and we can see that repeated measures show that there's an increased TSH, thyroid stimulating hormone. That's the hormone that controls how our thyroid gland acts. And with TSH goes up, it means your body is not normally producing enough thyroid hormones. So it goes up to try to compensate for the lower levels that are happening. And then the kidney function is not only in this, the association with kidney cancer is very strong in animals and in people, and this has been strengthened even by more recent studies. But what you see is kidney function is also decreasing. GFR is a measure of how well your kidneys can filter waste products out of the body. And I think that's important. The last point on this slide, just to mention, is that PFHXS appears to have a half-life in our bodies of over 10 years. That's longer than PFOA or PFOS or PFNA, all of which have half-lives in the multiple years, but PFHXS is extremely long-lived in our bodies. Another thing that PFAS do, I've mentioned their hormonal effects, I mentioned their effects on pregnancy. Well, they also appear to affect how long a woman can breastfeed. And both of these slides, if you look on the slide, I think it's on your left with that says product liminal survival estimates at the top. The blue are those women who had the lowest PFOA levels, and then whether they had, we divided this population into 4 different levels of exposure, with Q4 being the highest. And what you can see is once you get above the lowest levels, these women all tend to nurse their babies for a shorter period of time. On the right slide here, as you can see, it doesn't matter whether it's PFOA or PFOS or PFNA or PFDA or even PFHXS. In all cases, the breastfeeding duration decreases. And we know that this is from interviews with the women and from stuff, this is not necessarily that they didn't want to keep breastfeeding, is they had trouble. And again, we have experimental animal data that talks about problems in mammary gland development and the ability to lactate in our animals as well as now people. Now, we've been told that these short chain PFAS, which I mentioned are kind of the substitutes for PFOA and PFOS and so on, are going to be less of a problem. But all the studies that are now coming out show it doesn't matter which short chain you look at, they all have adverse effects. So the fluorotelomeres, which are the first bullet, increased inflammation and cell death. 2 of the short chains, and note these because these are present in the water in Pittsburgh, increased liver weights and enzymes and cause problems in the liver. Exactly the same effects as we saw with PFOA and PFOS. And then Gen-X, which is the one which is not a problem in Pittsburgh's water, but certainly, as you probably have heard, is a major problem or had been a major problem in the Cape Fear and in Wilmington, does the same kinds of adverse liver effects as PFOA, and the concentrations in the liver at which this happens are actually lower. So again, the point is that these short chains cause the same effects as the long chains. Now here's just some data that I took from the Haw River Assembly about what's present in the municipal drinking water supplies from Pittsburgh, and comparing the finished water would be what's in Pittsburgh. And if you look at this, I just want you to know, if you kind of march up the left from the blue, that's what we call a C4, 4 carbon, 5 carbon. The gold color is the PFHXA, which is the 6 carbon relative of PFOA. And then you go down is the PFPFOA and PFNA and so on. And then you have, what you can see is the levels of PFOA are relatively small in this population, but the levels, for example, and PFOS are a little bit high, are higher, but many of the others are not so high. The high ones are, say, the penta, the 5 carbon PEA, and the HXA and the HPA, the 7 carbon ones. You've got a lot of that in the drinking water in Pittsburgh. A point that I'd like to make is that as blood levels rise of these chemicals, or I'm sorry, as drinking water levels rise, so do blood levels. This happens to be some data related to PFOA. Again, we have the most data for PFOA and PFOS, but what you can see here, if you look up across the bottom, that is the drinking water concentration goes up from 1 to 10 to eventually 100. The amount in the blood on a nanograms per mil of blood, or parts per billion levels in blood, go up dramatically. And if you ever want to know what the approximate relationship is, just multiply the concentration in drinking water by about 100. It'll get you in the range of what would be present in the blood of people drinking that drinking water. So this is just a little data coming from Wilmington, North Carolina, that was just published. And I want to show you a couple of points here. First of all, is there are a lot of these new short chain PFAS that they're found in the water going into Wilmington. This was after Chemours stopped dumping Gen X directly into the Cape Fear River. So they found a teeny bit of Gen X in the water, but they found a whole bunch of other short chains. Some of them which were never intentionally made. And these were also present in the blood of the people that were sampled in Wilmington, North Carolina. So if you look in your graphs on the left, that's just comparing, for example, what was present, for example, in, say, the Naphian byproduct 2, what was present in the first sampling of people, and then 6 months later, there had been a little bit of decrease in those compounds. If you go to the ones on the right, the comparison here for PFHXS and PFOA and PFNA and PFOS, this is a comparison of people in the general US population, and this is from N. Haynes, which is a statistically based sampling of the entire US population. And what you see is levels in Wilmington people are higher than the US population as a whole. So again, if you're drinking contaminated water, your levels are also going to be higher. Now, what are the drinking water regulations? And I think it's important to understand that there are no federal drinking water regulations for PFAS at all. But in fact, a number of states have been moving ahead and establishing drinking water MCL as a maximum contaminant level. And what you can see is, for example, for PFOA, there's a range in levels. Michigan is 8, New Hampshire 12, New Jersey 14. This is parts per trillion. Vermont and Massachusetts actually look at the sum of the 4 PFAS that I have mentioned here, plus 1 or 2 others, and they have a sum of a total of 20. So many, our states are now moving to regulate these as a group. And I should say the Europeans are doing the same thing, just having put out a regulatory limit for the levels of PFAS in food, where they look at the sum of 4 PFAS in food. In fact, the 4 that I have up here. So again, the point is that the levels are quite low that are being regulated by the states that have moved ahead with drinking water regulations. Now, if you've got it in your water, what do you do about it? The problem that we're dealing with is that the legacy ones, what we call the long chain, the PFOA and the PFOS, for example, they can be removed by charcoal filtration. May not be complete, but it's a pretty good job. But when you move to the new ones, the short chain ones, they are very poorly removed by charcoal filtration. you have the opportunities, or you can remove them by something called reverse osmosis. Reverse osmosis does work. You have issues of what do you do with the concentrate that when you pull out this contaminated stuff, but this can be a method that works. It's much more expensive than dealing with charcoal filtration. So I just want to kind of leave you with 2 points. The first one is the health effects, and remind you that PFAS are multi-system toxicants. They affect lots of different organs in our bodies. Thyroid, immune, liver, pancreas, kidney, cancer, our reproductive organs, neurodevelopment. This is not the full list. There is evidence for other impacts as well. So this is not the kind of contaminant that affects one tissue in one sex of, say, just one kind of animal. This affects all animals, including people that have been looked at. The other thing I wanted to mention is that many of you know that Duke University, Dr. Heather Stapleton, has been conducting looking at the levels in volunteers from Pittsburgh who are interested in having their serum levels measured. All the people who participated in that study, and I believe there are at least 51 people, have received their results. And Dr. Stapleton will be presenting this data at a public meeting a week from Saturday. I think it's a week from Saturday, maybe 2 weeks from Saturday, October 24th at 10 a.m. I'm not going to share all the data with you because it's not my study, but let's just say that people in Pittsburgh, at least from this sample of people, their median serum levels are higher than what was seen in Wilmington, and considerably higher, much higher than the American population as a whole. So with that, I want to thank you for having me, and I'd be very happy to answer any questions if we have the time. Thank you.
Thank you, Doctor. I would ask the board to direct any questions directly to the doctor.
Dr. Birnbaum, thank you for the presentation. This is Michael Fiocco speaking.
Hi, Michael.
In your commentary, I think you said that, well, I wasn't sure, so the question is, you mentioned reduction in production of PFOA in 2002 and PFAS in 2013.
No, that's reversed. PFOS in about 2002, 3M was essentially the sole US producer and stopped making it. They stopped making it, and they also made others anyway.
Okay, so that explains it, because you followed that up by saying the US has stopped, but China has not.
Correct.
So the chemicals are still being produced.
They are still being produced, and in some cases, they are still, stockpiles, for example, are still being used.
And you made mention of, I think, a high concentration in the Arctic. So
yeah, how
is this material migrating?
How does it get there? This is true of many persistent organic chemicals. They undergo something like that's called, well, there are a couple ways, but one is it's called volatile distillation. In other words, at temperate climes, a certain amount of them vaporizes and moves through the upper atmosphere, and then when it gets cold, it comes out of solution, basically. But it also, these compounds are very water soluble, and so they actually move with the ocean currents and stuff and end up in the Arctic. So you have not only contamination of the, for example, of the ice and the land, you also have contamination of the critters, whether they're land critters or whether there are sea mammals or fish.
Got it. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Doctor, this is Jim Noss. Again, thank you so much, but I was wondering if you can tell us whether or not, particularly in the states that have established some limits on the amount of these compounds in drinking water, whether or not the attempts that have been made to reduce the amount that are actually then consumed by the public have gone down significantly?
I don't think anyone's really asked that question. Many of the states, these establishment of regulatory limits in drinking water, they're all within the last year or two.
Okay.
The other point is, if your drinking water is not contaminated, that doesn't mean you're not exposed, because these compounds are heavily used in many kinds of food packaging materials. Again, a number of states are starting to regulate that. In Europe, Denmark has actually banned all PFAS in food packaging. There's a bill that's sitting on Governor Cuomo's desk in New York, a bipartisan effort which bans PFAS in all packaging. I think the state of Washington and California, maybe and other ones are looking to ban it. But it's, you know, the PFAS are used in lots of consumer products. And again, the marketplace has spoken a little bit. So certain of our big stores no longer, for example, have PFAS on the carpets that they sell because people said they didn't want that
Anymore.
on things that they bought.
Okay.
Dr. Birnbaum, this is
Yes.
John Bonnets. Thank you
John.
very much for appearing and for sharing with us. I have a kind of a vague question. I'd like you to elaborate a little bit on the immune effects. Particularly, I've read very briefly of some of these perfluoral compounds interfering with vaccinations or making the vaccinations less effective. And then there's a follow-up question from the public asking how effective are RO systems, home RO systems, in reducing concentrations below the EPA LHA?
Okay, I'm going to take the second one first. I'm not an expert in, for example, the remediation of technology, but my understanding is that RO are really quite effective. And I do know I have a number, Dr. Stapleton will probably tell you that she put an RO system under her sink so that she has water that doesn't have the RO. I do know of other people who've put in whole house RO systems so that there's nothing coming into their home at all. As far as the vaccination, there have been a number of studies done that have shown the ability of PFOA and PFOS and PFDA and a number of the other compounds to suppress the ability of the body to respond to a vaccination to have a normal therapeutic antibody titer. So again, this has been shown in monkeys, it's been shown in rats and mice, and it has been demonstrated in several different human populations. In the Faroe Islands, which is a population, it's part of Denmark, and it's a big island in the North Sea. It's been shown in Slovakia, and it's been shown in Japan. And these are not easy studies to do because they require that you're following people usually take samples in the mother or at least in the infant and continue to follow, and then you have to measure it after, for example, a vaccination response. But in studies in Norway and in Japan, they've been able to show that children who had higher levels when they were infants from their mother, in fact, have more infections, are more likely to be hospitalized, as well as having the lower vaccination success rate. So in the time of COVID, I find that kind of concerning.
Hi,
Yep.
Dr. Birnbaum.
No questions?
I had
Katie?
one. This is Katie. I had one. I wanted to know if you can speak to issues with the liver. Is there some connection with gallbladder dysfunctions as well tied to that? Have they shown that at all?
That's a great question. We know that the PFAS, well, I'm going to back up a second. We know that PFOA and PFAS largely are in your blood and in your liver and in your kidneys. And they tend to be eliminated from the kidneys and then they recirculate. They're picked back up in the gut and go back to the liver and the kidneys in that way. I don't know. There's some evidence that there are, that the gallbladder has certain kind of molecules which will bind the PFAS more. But I haven't seen any direct, I don't know of any direct studies on that, but we know that PFAS are altering liver function. They're changing the ability of our liver to metabolize other chemicals, because the PFAS themselves aren't being metabolized, but they're impacting the ability to metabolize other chemicals. So we know that there are issues with the liver, and that there are many different receptor systems that are present in the liver and some in other tissues that get impacted by the PFAS chemicals.
Okay. Thank
Oh,
you.
okay.
Yeah, that makes sense. Thank you.
Okay.
Dr. Birnbaum, this is Pamela Baldwin. I just would like to say thank you very much for that presentation. Also, I do have a question in reference to the different states. You highlighted a couple of states. Are other states doing these studies? Or perhaps you can let us know which other states are doing this as well, and things such as that.
Well, I'm happy to make all my slides available. I
Okay.
think I shared them. I think Cassie has them, and she can, or you can send me an email, and I'm happy to share them with you. That was, I just recently tried to pull out all the information on the states that actually had regulatory limits.
Okay.
There are about 14 different states that have advisories or are looking at PFAS, but haven't actually regulated and say, you know, here's your limit. If you exceed this, then there's certain kind of penalties. Colorado is in the point of establishing regulatory limits, for example, but they're not in place yet as far as I know. And again, as I said, there are drinking water limits, and then a number of states have limits for food packaging.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Okay.
Dr. Birnbaum, have you collected and perhaps put in a single document the NC guideline levels that you mentioned?
I don't think I actually mentioned North Carolina, because I don't think North Carolina actually has enforceable regulatory limits yet.
Yeah, I thought, well, I read through the list of states, and I thought NC was under the category of NC of guideline level or limits, guideline levels, sorry.
That's right. And I believe North Carolina guidelines levels, EPA used to have a guideline of about 400 parts per trillion. They revised that guideline level for PFOA plus PFOS in 2016, which is, it's an advisory level, health advisory, down to 70. There are a number of states who have adopted that as a health advisory kind of level. The Agency for Toxic Substances and Disease Registry, which is part of CDC, 2 years ago released their proposal to drop kind of an advisory level down to about, well, again, they were looking at 4 PFAS, PFOA, PFOS, PFHXS, and PFNA, the same 4 that the EU has just used to regulate amounts in food. And an ATSGR dropped that level considerably, and I forget exactly what it dropped to because it has not been finalized by ATSGR, but it was much lower than EPA's level. So I think there's, you know, discussion on what are appropriate levels and what is doable. California, Cal EPA recently did a risk assessment for PFOA, and they concluded that a virtually safe dose would be 0.1 parts per trillion in drinking water for an association with a 1 in a million cancer risk. So 10 parts per trillion of PFOA in drinking water would be approximately a 1 in 10,000 increased cancer risk. And they are now, their California Water Board is notifying all consumers whose water exceeds that 10, that their water is above the 10. You get into issues of what can be readily measured, how many chemistry laboratories or commercial laboratories have the capability to do these measurements and so on when you start getting into the lower levels.
So is North Carolina simply adopting the EPA guidelines as the guideline levels?
You know, Michael, I'm not an expert in the North Carolina regulatory, but I believe they are looking at the EPA levels. They may be more stringent on the Gen X that they're recommending. EPA may actually come out with regulatory levels or for Gen X and PFBS before they do for PFOA and PFOS.
Okay.
Doctor,
Yes.
on the
Yes.
sorry,
Yes,
on
Scott.
the treatment options, was that study about home-based treatment options or?
Yes, that was, those are, I should have acknowledged, it said it on the bottom, but that's some stuff that Heather Stapleton gave me, that she has information that she generated when she and others, some other folks from state and so on, were looking at home-based options. Detlef Knapp from North Carolina State has been looking at different ways to potentially remove PFAS from drinking water, and even some potential ways that it could be broken down. But for example, he's been looking at issues of thermal oxidation. That's obviously not very useful for a river. It could be useful for material coming out of a smokestack, where you could put something up on a smokestack.
Okay, thank you.
You're
And
welcome.
there's a question as well for the new non-stick pans that claim to be PFOA free. Have they changed to short chain, or is it?
Yes. Yeah. So I know about 2 years ago, I had gotten rid of most of my old Teflon pans quite a number of years ago. And I was, I think in, well, let's just say Walmart, and I was looking at the pans for the heck of it. And there were many pans that were many brands that were labeled PFOA free. There were only 1 or 2 that are labeled PFAS free. So if it says PFAS free, it doesn't have any of the short chains. If it says PFOA free, it's got short chains in it.
Okay, thank
So
you.
I did treat myself to a couple new PFAS free pans.
Anyone else with questions for?
I had another one. This is Katie again. I wanted to know, since each state kind of has their own situation here going on with PFAS contamination, and they are so persistent, and you clearly showed how it can stay in somebody for a long time. Don't you think those standards should be kind of tailored to the state depending on what condition we're already in? So like we can't have the same regulatory standard for here in North Carolina when we've been exposed at such high levels in certain areas. Don't you think the levels should be lower?
I think we'd be much better off if we had a single federal standard for what the regulatory level was. Of course, I'd like to see it lower than EPA is talking about, because since these chemicals never go away and they build up in our bodies, it isn't like you can say this is the level today. Well, for example, Katie, if I measured your blood today, some of the chemicals that are in there, they could have been in you for the last 20 years. Something like PFHXS, if the tap were totally turned off, 10 years from now, you'd still have half of what you had today. So, I think it's very difficult frequently for consumers and also for industry to have different regulations in different states. Okay. I think it's important to realize that drinking water contamination has been demonstrated now for over 110 million Americans all around the country. That's just drinking water contamination, and that's just looking at PFOA and PFOS, not all the others. And that's the major problem I think that we deal with, is you have to say, well, what's being measured? And in a lot of the, when a lot of these compounds are being followed, someone might only be looking at 1 of them or 2 of them or 3 of them. And we know that at least in the Cape Fear River, when people try to say what's in the Cape Fear, they're only able to identify about 20 to 25% of the PFAS that are in the river. There's lots of other stuff that we don't even know what it is other than it's a PFAS.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
So, Dr. Birnbaum, one final question
Sure.
in terms of terminology. I think that I'm sensing from your presentation a new wrinkle on my understanding of these acronyms. I think I'm understanding from you that PFAS is or can be used as the universe of these compounds of concern, and PFOS is a subset of that?
That's absolutely true. PFAS is the entire class of thousands and thousands of chemicals that have multiple fluorines and several carbons, basically. And then you have many different kinds. So it's not only PFOS and PFOA and their relatives, then you have other things that have more complicated structures. They might have an oxygen right in the middle. That doesn't appear to affect its persistence in the environment.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
You're welcome. Let me just say that I'm, again, I think Katie has learned this, that I'm very happy to respond to people if there are any questions. Please don't hesitate to try to contact me. I'm way too easy to find. And so, you know, if you Google me, I'll come up. And I'm really happy to answer questions. I really hope that I can communicate what the science says adequately.
Well, Doctor, thank you so much for your time and your efforts. As you can imagine, the board here in Pittsburgh has been struggling for a while with the proper and way to go about dealing with this and the kind of remedial measures we might be able to take and the information that our citizens need to have. And so this presentation and the question and answers in particular were a great benefit to us, and we thank you.
Oh, good. I'm glad. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Doctor.
Thank you.
Enjoy the rest of your meeting.
Thank
Linda,
you.
thank you so much.
Okay.
All right. Thank you. Well, next on the agenda is Water Quality Task Force report.
Yes.
Chris,
And
are we up for that?
Emily and I are actually on. Before I start, I wanted to do a quick thank you to Linda. And I was actually going to introduce her to everybody. For those that are listening that don't know me, I'm Katie, the chair of the Pittsburgh Water Quality Task Force that was just put together this year. And we found some research that Linda had done. It was published this summer, and we used her in our quest for understanding. And she's been extraordinary and really a legend. I have to, for those who aren't in the scientific world, especially in micro, I was nerding out this week because we had lunch and I actually got to meet her. So I have to just say an introduction to her. She was in 40 years as a government scientist. 10 of those years she served as the director of National Institute of Environmental Health Sciences. She's the first woman and first toxicologist to direct the National Institute of Environmental Health Sciences and the National Toxicology Program. And she left behind a legacy. So I found a great article written about her that I've shared with the board and the mayor. I found it extraordinary, and I figured you guys could all read it. She recently retired in 2019, and she's now on a quest to help communities like us. So she's speaking out now, and I'm honored. She currently serves as a special volunteer and principal investigator for UNC School of Medicine. And this year she was appointed as a scholar in residence at Duke University Nicholas School of the Environment. So I just had to let everybody know who you are and what you're doing, because I find you extraordinary. I look up to you, and I can't thank you enough for coming tonight. I'm truly honored. So I just wanted to make sure everybody understands who you are and what you've just done.
Thank you all for listening. I appreciate it. And I look forward to hearing what continues to happen in Pittsburgh, and realize that you're not alone and you're not the only community dealing with these issues.
Well, thank you. Now our report, Emily's on. Are you there, Emily?
I'm here.
We have actually, we're waiting on a few appendices to attach to our report, but I would say I'm very proud of what we've done. We've worked extremely hard to deliver a report that's full of data, suggestions, and a way ahead for the town to give you guys a good understanding of really the path that we should probably take. So I spoke to Chris earlier. I'm not sure if you guys want to schedule a formal presentation of the report and have time to review it, or if you would like for Emily and I to kind of introduce parts of it tonight. I was leaving that up to you. I didn't know how much time we had.
Yeah, Katie, and I appreciate all those kind words for Dr. Birnbaum and kind of giving her CV, so to speak. That's very helpful. Certainly to credential, a very credentialed speaker we had tonight. So kind of the idea tonight was the board's been had a couple deadlines that have come and gone, and I think all of us would agree that we want a high quality report and not just something that meets the deadline. And so the board's been patient with that, and I think we're all eager to see something. So it was more of trying to get a better idea from a firsthand account from you and Emily tonight, and that way the board can see where the status is. I think my preference would be to give, once y'all are complete, give the board a few weeks to review it, to set it down, pick it back up, review it again, and then ultimately have a formal presentation from the task force, so that they can we can all have a really educated session on it. I think we're very appreciative of both having the data that supports suggestions, but I think the suggestions are a really important part of that, and so that we can find a path forward. So I'll open up really for the board to have any comment from there, but to kind of segue between you and the board, that's kind of where my mind was channeling this. And but certainly whatever the board would like, we'll see if we can follow.
Yeah.
Thanks, Chris. Yeah, I agree. I think I'm very interested to see it. And did I understand correctly that the report is done? It's just
it is.
The body and the appendices are what are still being prepared?
Everything's been prepared. We're actually waiting to attach a few appendices. I'm waiting for replies from certain individuals to get those attachments in, because it's critical for your understanding. When you read certain sections, you definitely need to reference these appendices. So that's all that has to be added in. It's done and completed. So I came with it tonight just in case you guys wanted us to go through it. I would say I agree. I think it'd be great if we could have multiple members come in and speak to their parts instead of just me speaking on the parts, but I will do whatever you guys want.
Sure. No, I was curious, because I tell Chris this sometimes too, if we can get chunks to review instead of one large thing, that was possible. But you know, understand, and it sounds like it's imminent now, so that's good.
It seems to me that it might be most productive if we receive the report and the board had an opportunity to really spend some time going through it and taking some notes, and then having a presentation of the report where we could really have a real discussion, a back and forth discussion on this report. This is such an important issue for this board and for the town and the citizens that live here, that I think it's worth really spending time in digesting the report, and then having this back and forth discussion where we truly can gain a full understanding of the best way forward for us. So that's my opinion on where we ought to go from here.
Yeah, and Mayor, kind of what we were talking about and what Katie and I have talked about some as we corresponded on this was, you know, we can either try to set up a target date in a few weeks. Obviously, regular meetings is where we would prefer to kind of have this, because we want it to be a really open conversation for the public to be able to to see both our task force and our elected officials converse about a really important topic. Or we can, not set that, let's say like today, but let's get the report, let's review it, and then I can correspond with Katie and Emily and the rest of the task force and say, hey, the board's had this for a few weeks, they feel prepared. Can y'all come to the next meeting? We're trying to get our agendas out earlier and earlier. So we give them a few weeks notice to prepare, make sure they have the proper folks in town to have that. And so really either way, we can either have it kind of TBD tonight with the hope that we have that report soon, or we can go ahead and provide a target date. And so anyone listening in can say, oh, great, on whatever that meeting is, I'll listen in and go from there with the caveat of keep an eye on the agendas in general because they do change from time to time. So.
And Chris, if I could just jump in to give you guys maybe some important information about making that decision. We did really try to keep this as concise as we could. So the report itself is about 6 pages, and there are 6 appendices that are about 1 page each. There's one appendix that I think is 2 pages long. So we're not giving you like 60 pages of material to go through.
Right.
It's a 6-page report and then 6 fairly short appendices for reference.
Like,
That's helpful. That's a great context. 6 pages versus, a couple hundred pages of the thought of being like, oh man, there's appendices. It's going to be an exhaustive document. So I think that helps some of the framework there.
well, I like Chris's idea. Let's take a couple of weeks to digest it. I think if it is 6 pages, then I expect only the best has been put into those pages, and take it from there. So Katie, I'm curious, you're waiting on a couple of appendices to wrap this thing up. Do you have an expectation as to when that's going to happen?
I'm hoping by tomorrow.
Okay.
I set that idea that tomorrow is when I'm expecting it, so I can give Chris an update as soon as I have him.
Okay.
Yeah.
And for everyone's sake, as soon as I get it, I'll forward it out to the board, and we'll have it put on the town website as well.
And then from there, we can then set a date and announce that to the public, and everyone can listen in as we go through a discussion of that document then.
Mm-hmm. It sounds if in fact the appendices can be finished tomorrow, then the report could be issued later this week. We could then take the time at our next board meeting to set the meeting for the following board meeting, which would give the public ample time to look at it, review it, be prepared, and then have a presentation. What would that be? The 9th of November?
The 9th of November, yes.
Yeah.
The 9th, yeah.
You could do that.
So tentatively, okay. Perfect.
Yeah.
Perfect. I'll share that with the Water Task Force.
How does that sound to the other board members? Okay.
I think it's good. I'd like to plan on it, and then I guess we can move it if we need to.
Right.
Yeah, that kind of assumes that we get the report this week or early next week. Give us some time to really dig in, understand it. At our leisure. We rarely get to do that.
We're working on that.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, in that case, then we could, at our next board meeting, we could discuss that a little bit, set the date, but tentatively November 9th would be the date then.
Okay, wonderful.
Okay.
Thank you guys so much.
Well, thank you so much.
Yeah.
For all your work. It's we're looking forward to it very much.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you guys.
Okay, thank you. Okay. All right. Anything else there? Or can move on to manager updates? Good, Chris.
All righty. Well, again, first and foremost, want to thank Dr. Birnbaum for her patience. She was originally scheduled for August 24th. The meeting ran long with a few items, and so fortunately enough, we were able to get her on tonight. So appreciate her patience over the last 6 weeks or so and delivering that presentation for us. And appreciate all Katie's work coordinating that with Dr. Birnbaum. She's been a real conduit for between the town and Dr. Birnbaum and having her set up. So that work didn't go unnoticed, and I appreciate her acting on our behalf to have her here tonight. So I really appreciate that, Katie.
No problem.
Yeah, great. A couple things, and Dr. Birnbaum had this in her report as well, that there is a town hall on October 24th from 10 a.m. to 11 a.m. To go over Dr. Stapleton's report for the blood work and the water analysis for this very similar comment or content that we've been talking about here for the last few moments. I did meet with Dr. Stapleton on Friday and talked about it. It was a very educational, informative thing for me. And so I expect anyone who listens in on Saturday, the 24th, to have a really informed conversation. They've done tremendous work, and I think we're very fortunate in this area to have the professionals around us, both in academia and in the professional world, to be able to analyze these environmental problems. I think we'd all prefer not to have these problems in our community. That wish we just had, the Fiji water plant in the backyard, and you throw it in there and be good to go. But unfortunately, that's not our plight. But I think the second best thing is, if we have to deal with this, that we do have the adequate professionals around us to support us in our decision making, to make a real difference with this for our citizens and residents. So appreciative to everyone out there who's working towards this effort, including those on this call today. Shifting gears to a completely different thing from an update. I did share this with the board last week, and emergency management for Chatham County announced that they will be doing an alarm test at Sharon Harris on this Wednesday at 10 a.m. So when you hear the nuclear alarms go off, and that's not a hyperbole or figurative, that is the actual thing that will be going off. For any of those listening, do not be alarmed. That is a test of the system. And so if you have any questions, our county emergency management has informed us to direct people to them if they have any suspicion that it's something different than the test. So I do want to send that out, because I can imagine it would be rather alarming to hear the nuclear sirens go off and not know that is in fact a test. A couple things pertaining to the agenda tonight. We did add an item 15 to your consent agenda. So for those of you who have looked at the agenda previous to this afternoon on the town website, we did add an item 15. We received some positive news at the end of last week, and myself and our attorney have been working, trying to figure out when we could have this session for our EREID. This is for the environmental work on our line to Sanford and the associated wastewater improvements there. And so what we were doing is we will have the EREID has been provided back to the town. We will have it on the town website this week, and we publish in public notice of that meeting later this week as well. We are intending to have that on the November 9th Board of Commissioners meeting. So what you have is item 15 on your consent agenda, which is to set the meeting for that November 9th meeting. We have to have 2 weeks, I'll say, airing of the document prior to having that meeting. And so considering we're 2 weeks away from the 26th, out of abundance of caution, we just want to go ahead and put that on the 9th to give everyone a full and adequate time to review those documents and to come to the meeting on the 9th with any questions they may have on that project. Let's see. And I think that's all I have. All the items we have on the consent agenda. We have a rather robust consent agenda tonight, but we tried to catch up with some minutes and to provide some other items for some things. Happy to entertain any comments you may have on those prior to us picking up that item, but that's all the items I have for tonight.
Yeah, John, you had a question?
Yes, Mayor Nass and Mr. Kennedy, I would like to ask if the board would support pulling one item from the consent agenda for further discussion. That is item number 7, the budget amendment to adopt the fee for EV charging station. I saw some questions that went through by email, but I wasn't able to go back and see whether or not all questions had been resolved or answered. And I have a question as well.
I know I had several questions and mine were answered by both Kyle and Chris. So, but I'll support pulling it if that's your desire.
Thank you.
Okay, so we would put that as the second item or the first item on old business.
Well, I think it would probably be best to put that as in
New
deference
business.
over item 2 on new business.
Yeah.
Okay, I thought it'd come before us before. All right, item 2, new business would be charging. All right,
Thank you.
okay. All right. Anything else for Chris? I have no updates tonight, and for the commissioner updates, I thought I would just start at one end of the virtual table and go around. So Jay, did you have anything on any of these items that are?
No, sir, do not.
Thank you, Jay. Okay, Kyle.
Yes, sir. The Affordable Housing Advisory Committee, October 16th is the closing date for those applications. So get on that if you're working on it, and then we'll meet at the end of October to review and score those. I haven't been attending Chatham Arts Council meetings, but I did reach out to them for an update as that's been lacking in our meetings. So they are doing artist support grants, and the winners will be announced soon. They also have care grants, and about $22,000 was donated for those. And they've got about $10,000 remaining to give away to grants to artists that can apply for that. And they're also working on what they're calling the Artists Outside Schools program. They used to have the Artist in Schools program, and they're shifting that in light of the coronavirus. So that's the Chatham Arts Council. Before Commissioner Fiocchi gets to his Main Street Pittsboro update, I do have some exciting news that they were selected and won a Small Town America Civic Volunteer Award. So we had submitted them for that, for the great work that Main Street Pittsboro does. And I think Chris and I found out last week maybe that they were selected as one of the winners in that nationwide contest. So great work there. And we'll see. I think there's some more formal things coming on that, but we were notified that they won. So good work.
Wow.
Yeah.
Glad to hear it.
Yeah.
That's good news.
It
is a dedicated group. I assure you that. Yeah. Fantastic. Thanks for the news.
Mm-hmm. And then
First item, did you go ahead?
Sorry, the Pittsboro Boys and Girls Club. We did last week. We did some tours of a couple of facilities in Pittsboro that are potential locations, and had some really good visits and some really good potential there that we're continuing to work on. We also formally signed the memorandum of understanding with the Central Carolina Boys and Girls Club. So now we are officially an advisory board and can receive money and do a lot of other things. So you'll hear a lot more about that coming up here probably in the next week or two. But that was a really big step for the steering committee to kind of transition to the advisory board. And it does look like we're on track to open at the beginning of the year. So lots of great progress there.
Okay. Michael?
I will be brief this time. So good news on Main Street Pittsboro. So the Welcome Center has its CO, and so furniture has been moved in, and hopefully we'll be opening, we hope sometime in October. But we will have to play that by ear, as everyone plays everything by ear these days. Attended the TARPO meeting, and there was a presentation by Lisa Mathis, who is a board member of the Department of Transportation. And not great news, lots of funding issues, and they're estimating that for the STIP over the next 10 years, they're probably down about $2 billion. That's B with billion. So that's going to have a big effect on lots of projects. Happy to say that the Circle project downtown is still on schedule and funded, so that's good news. Some of the other projects with the Chatham Parkway and 87 widening are being kicked back a couple of years because of this. So that's, you know, difficult news, but the NCDOT is suffering from a lack of revenue associated with COVID. Tomorrow morning is the EDC meeting. I am unable to attend that, so if anyone would like to participate in my stead, let me know and I'll send you the information for linking to the Zoom meeting. It's a Zoom platform. Parks and Rec Advisory Board meeting, nothing since our last meeting, but the next meeting is this Wednesday evening, so I'll be attending that. And I think that's it.
Mayor Pro Tem Baldwin?
No, I don't have anything today. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. And John? Not today? Okay. Well, in that case, I would then ask for or entertain a motion for approval of the consent agenda with the item 15 added that we got today and that Chris mentioned.
And with number 7 stricken from the order.
Right. And number 7 is stricken, yes.
So moved.
Is there a second?
I second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Thank you.
Sorry, who actually entertained the motion first?
Let's give it to Kyle.
Okay.
And then we'll let Ms. Baldwin. Otherwise, Ms. Baldwin may have gotten both of them, but I don't think we can do that.
No. I think it was a tie there, but I think you're right.
Yes,
So
thank you.
Mr. Shipp for the motion and Ms. Baldwin for the second.
I appreciate that.
Okay. Cassie, do we have any public comment tonight?
Not at this time.
Okay. That takes us then to old business, the rezoning, the Rexford Landing LLC.
Yes, sir. This is Teresa Thompson. Good evening, Mr. Mayor, members of the board.
Good evening.
I'm going to try and bring the full screen. Is it in full screen mode?
Yes, you can see it.
Rexford Landing LLC is requesting conditional zoning from RA5 to RA for a 116 single-family residential lot subdivision located on parcel 6580, adjacent to Old Graham Road and US Highway 64 bypass. The property currently is undeveloped. Adjacent properties include single-family dwellings and undeveloped property. The property is located in the RA5 zoning district, which requires a 5-acre lot average and a 3-acre minimum. The applicant is proposing to rezone to RA, which allows a 40,000 square foot lot minimum. The applicant is proposing a 1-acre minimum lot size, which meets the RA zoning minimum lot size requirement. Looking at the zoning map, the surrounding area is RA5, RA2, RA, and MUPD. Chatham County's zoning jurisdiction is also adjacent to the property, including the R1 and R5 zoning districts. The Pittsburgh Future Land Use Map classifies this area as part of the rural residential land use category. The requested rezoning to the RA zoning district is not compatible with the rural residential land use category. The board met to consider this request last on August 24th. Discussion that occurred at this meeting, including the clubhouse being centrally located, extending public water to each lot, including details on pocket parks, providing more details on the connection to Milliken Road, the timeline on the closure of the construction entrance, details on affordable housing, and a timeline on the construction of the clubhouse, playgrounds, and walking trails. The applicant has updated the proposed additional conditions as illustrated in the packet, which the applicant has signed. Any changes to the conditions, if mutually agreed upon by the board and the applicant, must be consented to in writing by the applicant. Regarding extending public water to each lot, the applicant updated condition number 1. The applicant also speaks to the possibility for future connectivity to other properties along Old Graham Road, and that the sizing of the water line will be determined by Public Works staff. Staff would like to note that no testing or engineering has been conducted on this property yet to determine if there is adequate fire flow. Staff would also like to note that the zoning ordinance only requires exhibit map standards to be met at this step. Subdivision standards specific to preliminary plat approval, fire marshal, NCDOT, stormwater, and other local and state reviews have not taken place yet. So there is a possibility that issues may arise during the preliminary plat review process. Staff can approve minor modifications that do not significantly alter the approved plans or its conditions. Any major changes will require a new rezoning approval. The applicant also updated number 3 to clarify that all utility easements will be located and designed to Public Works staff specifications. Regarding the August 24th discussion and providing more details on the connection to Milliken Road, the applicant updated number 6 to remove the condition to connect to Milliken Road, which the applicant can speak to more on this in detail. Concerning the discussion on including details on pocket parks, the applicant updated condition number 7 to state that they will include a mixture of picnic tables and seating, and some pocket parks will be left undisturbed. August 24th discussion included the clubhouse being centrally located and including a timeline on the construction of the clubhouse, playgrounds, and walking trails. The applicant created a new condition, number 8. There he states the amenity center will be completed by the 30th CO and will be centrally located. He also states the amenity center will include a pool, restrooms, and clubhouse. It was asked at the last meeting what the timeline on the closure of the construction entrance would be. The applicant updated number 9 to say the construction entrance will be closed and gated to be an emergency access easement only accessible to emergency personnel post-construction. Number 12 was added to specify that there will be a 30-foot vegetative and undisturbed setback along the entire boundary. The applicant also added number 13 to include details on affordable housing. The applicant is proposing to donate $595,000 in lieu of providing on-site affordable housing. Lastly, the applicant also added number 14, which is to petition for annexation within 30 days after preliminary plat approval. Staff would like to note that the requirement is to petition to annex, not that the board has to approve the annexation request. It is also to be determined at the preliminary plat step if the roads will be DOT or town streets, if annexed. Yes, sir, was there a question? Looking over the exhibit map, a few updates were made, including the removal of the amenity area. Actually, this. I'm sorry. But the amenity area was removed. November 15th. Okay. So the updated map should show the amenity area being removed. Okay, there we go. I'm sorry. There we go. I had the map up from the last meeting by accident. Including the removal of the amenity area from the southwest corner and removing the pocket park from the parcels located above to the north of Road C, which is near the northern portion of the property. By doing this, they were able to add 3 new lots. Other minor updates includes a note about the stub out to parcel 6588, and that the parcel 93108 will have access to Road G, which is located near the southwestern corner of the property. If approved, the exhibit map or approved additional conditions cannot be significantly altered, or the applicant will have to apply for a new conditional rezoning request. As stated before, the property is currently located in the rural residential land use category. The Pittsboro Land Use Plan identifies the rural residential land use category to include large lot residential development that will be supported by on-site well and septic systems. Based on the request not being consistent with the rural residential agricultural land use category, staff recommends denial. However, this rezoning request, being a legislative decision, gives the board discretion to approve if the board determines the approval to be reasonable and in the public interest. The property is located near other low to medium density subdivisions, such as Chapel Ridge, the Parks Drive, Powell Place, and a small subdivision on Old Farm Road. The property appears to have adequate soil types, limited wetlands, and no flood hazard areas, making it developable property. The property also has access to a public road and is located near a major highway, being US 64 bypass, and near the corporate limits of town, providing easy access and reduced travel times to town. The property is also located adjacent to the low-density residential neighborhood land use category, which includes residential development at a low enough density to support on-site septic systems, and that water may be supplied depending on the availability of nearby water lines. The applicant is proposing to connect to a nearby water line located on Russell Chapel Church Road. Therefore, if approved, the rezoning approval would also be deemed an amendment to the land use plan future land use map by reclassifying this property to low density residential neighborhood land use category. After discussion, staff recommends the board to make 2 separate motions. The first motion will be to adopt a land use plan consistency statement, either for approval or denial. The second motion is to adopt either the resolution to amend the zoning ordinance or adopt the resolution to deny the request for an amendment to the zoning ordinance. Thank you, and please let me know if you have any questions.
Questions? Discussion?
Well, thank you, Teresa, for going over that and for answering the questions earlier I had about the conditions and things like that. I think there's a little bit or some work for us to do and discussion on clarifying some of the conditions and making them a little bit more specific, but I'd also like to hear from the applicant about some of the changes that have been made, particularly since we saw this a couple of weeks ago or a month ago.
Yes, sir.
Is the applicant on?
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay.
Hi, how are y'all doing?
Good.
Good.
Thank you for that,
Good evening.
Teresa. Yeah, we did have some changes on the conditions. You know, I'd first like to say this has been a long process, which I'm sure all these tend to be. With COVID, it kind of extended out, which brought about some opportunity for us to really refine some things and kind of go back to our team and just check the viability of doing such a project and coming up with a new design. And, you know, the input from town staff has been extremely helpful, and their diligence has been great along the way. Some of the things we did change, you know, I know Teresa mentioned that we haven't had specific testing done yet outside of soil on the property. But in discussions with the town, we talked to Mr. Poteet. I think we had a meeting with him last year in the town staff's office, and they informed us of what that water line was coming down Old Graham, or coming down Russell's Chapel to Old Graham Road, 16-inch water line that goes north up to, you know, the high density of Chapel Ridge and the parks and those developments. He indicated back then, as well as again last, I guess 2 weeks ago, that a 16-inch line is more than enough, and it was intended to turn down Old Graham Road and connect by the dentist office, which is where it's stubbed out currently. And it was always intended to come down that road and do some things. So he was very grateful that we were considering taking it a quarter mile down the road to get them closer to that, as well as bring on, you know, 116 or so home sites. He indicated that we probably need a 8 to 12 at the most line coming down that, if all those houses down the road were connected, as well as bringing more on. He said you wouldn't have to bring a 16, but, you know, we leave that up to them. So we would put in whatever they needed to get it down to our development, as well as, you know, continuing down. So the possibility of all those residents being able to connect would be available to them. That kind of handles the one. Number 3 is the same kind of thing. I mean, that's going to be determined by public works staff. I mean, based on the design of the neighborhood, of course, and where it's got to go and where it's got to come in and go out of for future connectivity. We're open to anything that, you know, we can do with the public works staff to get that accommodated. Number 6, the stub out for the entrance for future connectivity. This was something that we talked about, I think, in the last meeting. And, you know, acquiring that parcel of land, there was a lot of discussion around that, whether we need to include it in our rezoning request. Our stance was, if it was acquired, we were going to keep it the way it is. We weren't going to build on it. We didn't want to rezone it. We were only going to use it as a connection to Milliken Road. Again, speaking to NCDOT, they did kind of, you know, state again that it's not being maintained because there isn't a number of home sites down at the end of the road that, you know, deem them responsible to maintain that road. So I think bringing that connection would give them the responsibility of doing that. But it would also bring more traffic through this development from on the north side of Milliken Road. There's a development out there that would probably, it'd be easier for them just to come through. So providing the stub out for future connectivity, I think is our best option, and putting a barricade on it. If someone on Milliken Road wants to connect, they can, but adding some of the other conditions that I'm going to answer that we changed and amended, it kind of pulls us in 2 different directions, with just acquiring more land without developing, which is fine, which we were intending to do, but then trying to help in doing some other concessions for like affordable housing and contributing money to that. So it just kind of didn't, you know, we couldn't do both, I guess. And I don't know if that third entrance is a huge thing, or bigger than, you know, revenue for the town or certainly the affordable housing component. Pocket parks is pretty self-explanatory. I think our goal is to leave a lot of the space undisturbed, green space, just to have privacy. Was there a question? The amenity center, completion of the 30th certificate of occupancy, pretty self-explanatory. The entrance, the construction entrance turned into an emergency personnel. We talked to the fire marshal. He indicated after looking at the plan and everything, and it was listed on the previous plan that we submitted, that it was going to be a temporary construction to be closed post-construction. He indicated that, you know, please leave it. I mean, if you can, that would be wonderful. You know, he was very appreciative of the design of the neighborhood to kind of show that we had 2 entrances and exits coming in off of Old Graham, and they didn't come in and connect to each other. They both went in their own directions, which would stop, you know, a lot of the just having emergency vehicles in there and kind of getting stuck and things like that. They really liked the design and saw that it would help a lot with emergency vehicles, and that third entrance would just kind of, you know, be a backup if anything. And the last one that we changed, was the affordable housing, and that we based that on the AMI down at Pittsburgh, which comes out to about $85,000 a unit, based on discussions we've had with you guys. The last, I don't know, last maybe 2 meetings was indicated somewhere between 5 and 7%. We came in at 6, and between that. You know, and again, we understand that there's not a program in place in Pittsburgh currently. It is something that, you know, I've been saying this, I think every time we talk, that it is something that I'm passionate about, seeing that program develop. I think there's a large need for affordable housing. Most places, some places have it, some places don't. You know, I live here. I think it's a big deal. I think it needs to be done. I think whatever is kind of holding it up right now, we'd like to see it kind of push forward. And if it's, you know, contributing that kind of money to a program to get it moving, even if it's not something that is directly involved with this project, you know, Habitat for Humanity needing funds to get infrastructure in so they can build homes that they're ready to build right now. You know, any of those things, I feel is just a big contribution, you know, a big thing to kind of help get this thing going. And then the annexation, I don't know if that was on the last one, but, you know, we would certainly petition to have it annexed after preliminary plat. And I think that's all that we changed. You guys have any questions on the updated ones, comments?
One question was about that I had was about the community center, and I see that it's not shown in the back corner now. It looks like it's potentially shown at the entrance by the mailbox, or to be determined.
So the last one that Teresa had up was down in the southwest corner, kind of. Mm-hmm. We did kind of toy with it up there by the entrance, but I think, you know, some of your comments last time was to have it centrally located. So we have the ability to kind of, you know, move it to a central location. If you look at that map that's been part of the exhibits now, we have some large pocket parks around. I mean, some of those pocket parks, you know, the communities that I see around Chatham County and other areas, they're community centers for 4 times these amount of homes. You know, they're not large parcels. I mean, we're talking 1 to 1.5 acres maybe. I mean, we'd have the ability to put something in here that was, you know, 2 acres, which I just think is a lot for a pool and a clubhouse. But you know, the way that Charles designed this, and we've kind of put this together, does give us the ability to move these pocket parks a little bit, include on, you know, one pocket park that's quite large. Maybe we could have one of those things, and another pocket park, we could have another one of those things, instead of kind of putting them all on one parcel and having like your, you know, your pool, your clubhouse and everything there. We might be able to spread them out a little bit and have 3 different pocket parks with 3 different, or the larger pocket parks, not necessarily the smaller ones. It'll just be walking trails for connectivity and so forth. But yeah, so that is the location TBD, but it's going to be a centrally located establishment there.
Okay, thank you.
Well, I think if it's going to be centrally located, then there's a conflict with this exhibit, which shows it at the entrance. So that obviously, if successful, would, I think, need to be resolved, or I think there would be a conflict that would be problematic to resolve.
So I'm looking at the current one. I don't see it at the entrance. I see
It's at the entrance, right
I
there.
think it says clubhouse.
Community center.
Yeah.
kiosk. Yeah.
Oh, community center. Yeah.
Building. At the front.
And Charles can probably
I didn't-
answer that question, as he's been tirelessly working on this design for a while, knows this pretty well.
And I wasn't aware that was added. The community center there.
The notation about the clubhouse,
Yes, sir. I wasn't
Teresa.
aware. Yes, sir.
You want to add to that, Charles?
Let me bring up the exhibit on my end real quick.
Okay.
This is the exhibit that was submitted. I guess it was October 2nd. Is that right?
It's dated September 25th.
September 25th.
Okay. I don't know where I got the October 2 date from.
I think those were the conditions, the day of the conditions.
So
Okay.
are you referring to the note with the red leaders?
Yeah.
So that's the community. That's for mail kiosks. That's the community center mail kiosks. How the mail for the community will be located at that inside each of those entrances where those red dots are.
Okay. So you're going to have two of them.
Right, so that people that are coming into the neighborhood to the north will get their mail on the north end at the north entrance, and the people coming into the community from the south entrance will get their mail at that kiosk.
So they could just be called mail kiosks,
Correct. Mhm.
because community center definitely made me think of clubhouse.
Yeah, that I should have worded that better.
Okay.
I have a couple of questions about the first Milliken Road, and did you all talk with the homeowners there again in reference to Milliken Road? Because I thought you all had talked with them, at least that's what I was thinking, indicating that you all would do something in reference to Milliken Road.
We have discussed options with them, and going back and forth with the conditions, as I mentioned a little bit ago, to acquire that property, to bring that connection, it is just putting us in two different directions with being able to donate money to an affordable housing program. So, I mean, to stub it out for future connectivity, it's going to be there. It can be connected. It's not a very far connection. But for us to actually connect it, we would have had to acquire that land. And then the discussions were to include it in our rezoning or exclude it. And if we didn't include it, which we didn't want to include rezoning because we didn't want to rezone it, it had to be taken out. So that connection, the connection for future connection is in there, the stub out, but the actual connection on the Milliken wasn't something that we could put into our conditions.
Okay, so the individuals are the landowners over there, which they were in support of this particular project. They are aware that that would no longer be the case?
They're aware that there's a connection there, and based on how this all goes, there's still the possibility of us acquiring something to make that connection. But it wasn't something that we could put in our rezoning application.
Right, but no, that's not what I'm asking. I'm saying, from my understanding, you all had discussed it with the individuals, the landowners there, and had sort of insinuated that you all would update that road. So that's what I'm asking. Are they now aware that you're not going to do anything in reference to Milliken Road? And if you could tell me again what you say DOT said about Milliken Road, why they're not maintaining that road?
There's one home site at the end of that road. The homes that are up on the top of Milliken, it stops, if you're looking at that map, it stops kind of where it starts curving, just above where that stream buffer is.
So you're saying DOT said that since there's one home there, they will not maintain the road?
I mean, that's what I heard from one individual at DOT when they looked at that road. 1529, they said they don't maintain it. There's not enough home sites at the end of the road.
Okay, I need to find out who that was because I want to talk with DOT about that.
Yeah.
So if you could provide that, that would be great.
I will.
And the other thing was that emergency entrance. I definitely would like an emergency entrance. I was hoping that it was going to be in another location further back toward the back of the development. But if that's the only place, then that's okay. The other thing I wanted to ask you about was the cemetery. Now, who's the owner now of that cemetery?
The property owner now, the Gaines family.
Okay. So it's the Gaines family that's buried there. Is that correct?
You know, they took this property in the 60s maybe, and I don't think they have any family members in there. I'm not quite sure who's in there, to be honest with you.
Okay, because I see where it said that it would be owned by the homeowners association and maintained by the homeowners association. I didn't know who would want to, if my loved one was buried there and someone was to tell me that I could not visit their particular grave because it's owned by the homeowners association, that would sort of upset me.
No,
So
that's
could
why yeah.
Could I speak to that question? So by state law, any cemetery, no one can prohibit an ability for somebody to get to a family cemetery such as this one. And that's why the cemetery is shown. So the cemetery is in a central location so that any family member can visit the cemetery. They have rights to the cemetery. It's the maintenance of the cemetery that the HOA will provide. So the HOA will provide the land. It will be open space. They will maintain the cemetery, keep it in good condition and available to any family member or any relative of a family member that may be buried there. That follows the state law.
Okay, that's what I was wondering. So basically, I did understand that the homeowners association would take care of it, but my main question was that if someone could visit that without any problems in reference to that, if their loved one was buried there.
Yes.
So I think that answers most of my questions. Thank you.
Thank you.
Pam, thank you for bringing up the stub out in the back there. I actually have rode up there about 2 weeks ago. Miss Peoples lives up there. But that road is in really, really bad shape. I can tell that the state has not worked on it in years. But I have a question regarding this main entrance. My map doesn't show emergency entrance. It shows 2 main entrances. Now, can you clarify the emergency entrance?
Yeah, so it's at the top northeast corner where that parcel highlighted in blue touches Old Graham Road.
Okay. And that's going to be a temporary, or it would be gated of somewhat?
For construction, we'll have it, it's gated now. We're probably going to keep it gated until we get moving with construction and then open up that parcel that has the entrances. And then we'll use that as a construction entrance. Post-construction, we're going to gate it and have a key for the fire department and emergency response vehicles.
Okay.
What will the surface material be?
I imagine it'd be pavement. I've seen them left gravel or crush and run. But I mean, it's not that big of a roadway. You know, the thing is, if you do it in pavement, people think it's kind of a road, but of course the gate's going to block that. If it's not, and it's just a gravel road, then it is kind of a deterrent right out of the gate. No pun intended, but
And Commissioner Fiocco, one of the things that staff has spoken with Ford about pertaining to any kind of emergency ingress and egress is there are a number of types of materials that you can put down that will withstand the apparatus load or the load of a fire apparatus that look like just grass.
Yeah.
You know, there's some, I'm sure for those who are familiar, they have these rings that can allow grass to go through them. They provide a good structural load. So in common areas or open space areas that also serve as emergency access, I think that's a good use of those. So it doesn't insinuate that that is in fact a common ingress or egress for the average homeowner or resident. But the fire department certainly knows where that is. It's maintained to a level so they can go through it. So I think, and Ford's been very open to our conversations at the staff level of looking at maybe perhaps some alternative measures, certainly within his prescribed budget, of course, as we go forward with it, but to find maybe some creative solutions that provide it without compromising functionality, maybe the overall aesthetic of the development.
No, I agree completely, and I think there's a product called Grass Pave, which I think you're referring to, which is the rings, and yeah, it gets mowed. Nobody knows what's there, other than the fact that it's helpful to put an edging to the surface so that the emergency vehicle driver understands they go beyond that point and they're no longer on terra firma, because those vehicles are very heavy, upwards of what, 75,000 pounds. So, okay.
So if I could interject real quickly, the provision is 60 feet wide. So and it was sized 60 feet wide to be able to accommodate two-way traffic in an emergency condition in and out through that entrance.
So you would envision the reinforced ground, if it's paved or otherwise, to be 60 feet wide?
No, so that the easement, the access itself is 60 feet wide. The width of the travel way would be 25.
Got it. Okay.
And that would give us extra ability for emergency personnel to come in and out in that corner of the neighborhood.
Mm-hmm.
One more quick question. I'm trying to see where the community center is, where you relocated it to. Could you point that out on the map?
So on this particular map, we just said it was going to be centrally located.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
We took it out that southwest corner and yeah.
Okay, but didn't identify a place. Okay.
And so in order to locate it, you're going to delete lots?
Yeah, I mean, and Charles can speak to this, but we've been looking at 109, you know, around that. I mean, that's as central as you can be. You know, again, it just depends on our preliminary plat, like how this all kind of flushes out with, I mean, he designed all the roads with the topography in mind. And
so the three lots that we can lose to devote to a community center are 109 and then 82 and 83.
Yeah, I can't tell where those are looking at the screen.
So 109, when you come through the northernmost entrance and when you get to the first intersection, opposite the cemetery, that's 109.
Okay.
And when you take a left and then you go down to the next intersection on the south side of Road H is lots 82 and 83.
Can you indicate with your cursor where that is?
Let me see how sophisticated I am with Zoom.
Whoever is controlling the cursor.
That's me.
Just right above the cursor. It's just right above the cursor right now is 82 and 83.
Oh, so but that's back in the corner.
you know, you got to go to the right. There you go, right there.
Okay.
I'm sorry, I was looking at H, but I didn't see the 82. So it's right there.
109, 82, or 83.
All right, so the advantage of 82 and 83, and that puts us in proximity to that lower stream buffer where some trails are going to go. So that's the advantage of those two. 109 is just a nice open space lot.
Yeah, and it is very centrally located.
You can't get much more than that, right?
Right. I mean, I would be more comfortable seeing it bubbled in a location saying this is the central location.
I have just one question, and I guess this maybe could be to Jeff or maybe just to other board members, but how are we feeling about satellite annexation? I thought we were trying to get away from that at one time. And the other question and maybe comment is the surrounding properties are all RA5, and I'm just a little concerned about these surrounding residents around that. According to this setback here, it says 30-foot rear setbacks.
Yeah, Jay.
I can hardly just read that.
To the satellite annexation question or comment, I think we would evaluate an annexation request once we had that before us. We haven't done really an evaluation of the site as it would pertain to community services and you know, how much that would impact town budget. So I think that's to be determined. I think we would have the ability to satellite annex if we wanted to, but we haven't done any analysis as to whether the town would want to do this annexation.
Okay.
Yeah, and to go with Jeff's comments there, Commissioner Farrell, that I think that the whole concept, as you probably have seen in some conversations you've had with me in the past, not pertaining to this project, but some others, is the whole point of having ETJ and having the zoning jurisdiction is that it comes into town. And if we don't annex it now, it never will. You're not going to get 116 landowners to annex at a future date. So it's either it annexes now or it never does. And so if we're going to impose our zoning regulation to it, I think that we need to annex it when it does develop. So to the best of my knowledge, it is annexable, if that's such a term, pursuant to the satellite annexation policies of the state. And as Teresa pointed out earlier, I think the clear difference between having the property annexed and having the property petitioned for annexation, to Teresa's point earlier and to Jeff's just a moment ago, of we'll look at the efficacy of that annexation request when it comes in at that time to make sure that our municipal services that would be provided can be provided in an efficient manner. We can always say, well, it was petitioned and we decided not to annex. Barring some unforeseen circumstance, I would suspect that we would annex the property, and it would be my professional opinion that we should annex it, because if we don't now, it will always be a donut hole, so to speak.
Regarding the satellite component of the annexation, is there enough satellite land available? I think it's what, 10% of the corporate limits?
Yeah, I think the only remaining, I want to say that the solar farm in Chatham Park South is a satellite annexation that we did a couple, 3 years ago. Christian Village used to be satellite annexation, but it's now contiguous with Chatham Park and some of their annexations that they've done in the past. So you're right, Michael. I think we would be we'd look at that, but I think we're under the threshold of 10%.
Got it. Okay. Yep.
Also,
Thanks.
in regards to that, I think the only thing remaining is the new water treatment and the old water treatment plants, but it is actually only one parcel away now from Northwood and the Northwood MUPD. So that 6590 is one parcel between those two. So it's still satellite, but close.
And Jay, could you repeat your second question so we make sure we hit that? Mr. Farrell?
You might have to back the recorder up.
It evaporated on you too.
Yeah. Yeah, very quick. It was the concerning the surrounding properties that are already zoned RA5. I'm just really concerned about this. These folks moved out there years ago, hoping to get away from this development more or less, and I understand the opportunity to sell this property too. So I'm a little apprehensive on both ways.
So if I may, thank you for that. And we've considered that. A couple of things. We did have a public hearing, or I had not at the public hearing, I think one gentleman came there, but when we had our neighborhood meeting, I had every one of these adjacent owners come to that meeting. And we showed the plan. And back then it was 128 home sites. We had one entrance off Old Graham. We didn't have the grand entrance of the 4-acre plat or the 4-acre lot right now. And not one of the people at the end of the meeting was against having this in their backyards. I think that 30-foot buffer around the property, where their homes are located, their homes are probably quite a distance from that already. And then where the homes are going to be for us, like they're going to be away from that 30-foot buffer as well. We'll have setbacks that'll kind of push those houses out. So they're going to be pretty far apart. And they didn't have much of a concern. The other thing is a lot of those lots around there, I understand the zoning, what it is now, and in discussions with everybody when it's come into play and all that. And I'll let Charles speak to this just as far as the lot sizes around there and all that. Charles.
We did do an analysis of the entire RA5 zoning district, and when we counted all of the parcels in that zoning district, we found out that there's 167 of those parcels are less than 5 acres, which comprise 59.2%. So 59.2% of the parcels in that zoning overlay are less than 5 acres. And when we consider the impact of our lots to that, we are raising that percentage by less than a percentage point. So that's what we looked at. But we also looked at just all the lots to the north that are roughly acre to acre and a half in size. So it does look like our community is in harmony with the lots adjoining us to the north.
So in regards to the affordable housing piece, I really appreciate your willingness to do something here outside of a requirement. And I understand we don't have any requirements right now, but I'm a little worried about this setting a precedent going forward for whatever that might be when we do come up with an ordinance. And so I think there was talk before of up to 10% of a set aside for that. And I know, we had talked, I think another meeting about from 5 to 7 and you chose 6, which is, certainly a significant amount of money. I'm just curious what the other commissioners think about that in terms of hopefully soon when we have a policy, if this is setting a precedent for what that policy might look like when it's developed.
Well, I agree, Kyle, and I certainly appreciate the work that Ford put into this. I think it's a very positive step. My target number, though, is 10%, and I'd like to see if this project can get there.
I mean, I think we could get closer to there. I mean, we don't have, we're taking away a lot or two for the amenity center that's on there right now. We have, I think, 116. So we're coming down a little bit from that. I mean, I'm open. I think if we can meet halfway there, we're at 6, which I think is a pretty strong number. You guys are at 10, which is, a bigger number. I think, if we could come in at 8, I think I have the ability to try to make that happen. It might be a little bit out of our comfort zone with financials and everything, but it's not something I'm going to say no to because it's something I'm passionate about. So I will do what I can to make that work. I think 10 is going to be a lot more difficult. I mean, we may have to come back and put more lots on the ground, add lots to be able to give that concession. The way it sits now, I think we'd be comfortable with an 8%.
I think that would translate to another couple of lots at 8%.
By my math, that would be just 9 1/4 or so, but obviously it's not a quarter.
Right.
Yeah, it would be 10 lots pretty much.
Yeah. Yeah, I'd be willing to work with you on that.
Agreed.
Well, let me just throw this out. I do understand this in reference to the affordable housing. That's a good idea. I do not want it to set a precedent. So as I said, let me just throw something out of the box. What about building some affordable housing there in the form of townhouses or condos?
So we thought about that, and in the beginning, that was something that we were really looking at. The problem is that it'd have to be higher density. So we're going to go in there more than 116 lots. I don't think condos or townhouses, the way I've proposed this with all the adjoiners, and in the beginning, that's what they thought it was going to be. This project, I think it was, 15 years ago, a developer came in here and they were going to do similar, and they were putting in a bunch of townhouses. The density was insane. They had 189 units in this parcel. And every adjoiner around here, that was their opening statement to me. We do not want to have this kind of thing in our backyard. We want the trees to remain. We want the nature. We want the, just the beauty of that area to kind of be preserved. So I think by adding those in, we're going to get into, number one, right now, we're not asking for any sewage allocation. These are all septic lots. They're all septic for each lot. We get into townhouses and things like that. It's going to change a lot of things. We may not be able to have septic for a row of 6 townhouses. And if we were to build homes, and we've done a lot of discussions with the affordable housing program, Community Home Trust. And I think that the challenge would be to build those homes, and I'm not against that, but to dedicate that number of lots as affordable housing lots, and then we'd have to build them, like my company would build those homes. They max out at, their contribution is $240,000 or $245,000 per unit. We'd be coming up with probably another 150 to 200 on top of donating the lot. So it would just cost a lot more. Now, if we were to give those lots instead of the payment in lieu of, the challenge, I think, for the town or for any affordable housing program would be, they've got to do that now. They've got the lots for free. We donated those, but now they've got to find someone that can build those for $250,000, on a 1 acre to 1.2 acre lot, which, affordable housing, I don't think they're on that big of lots. And then the third thing is the proximity to town. Like, there's no public transit out here. So people in affordable housing, now they're going to be worrying about how they're, how are they going to be transporting themselves back and forth to town. And considering all those things, we felt it a better option to donate that money to the town affordable housing program to be able to work within the, within the town limits, to be able to do that kind of thing where there was transit and there was, opportunity to build homes with maybe some infrastructure, some roads, or, anything. I mean, I think there's more opportunity in the town than out here in the ETJ to build those homes.
Well, the area where this is located would not qualify for either tax credit program for an affordable housing builder either, is something to remember. Because both of those tax credit programs require access to public transit, to proximity of food stores, et cetera. So either the 6% or the 9% would not qualify here for a builder coming in to try to build affordable housing program under the tax credit program.
I agree. I mean, that's true. We know I was definitely in the bird in the hands camp versus, trying to get housing actually built. But I don't think this is a good location for it. And I think it's it would be a challenge to the town to do something most useful with this money once we have it. But I think it'd be a fantastic start to our affordable housing fund.
As I said, it is a good start, and that's why I said I'd throw that out just to see. But in reference to transportation, I don't think it necessarily would mean that there would have to be public transportation, because we don't have public transportation now. And oftentimes when we say affordable housing, it's not necessarily people who don't have automobiles, it's people who may be teachers, firemen, police officers that need somewhere to live in Pittsburgh.
Right.
And right now, they cannot afford to live in a lot of these places.
Nope.
That's a lot of my concern, workforce housing. But I do, again, think this is a good place to start, but I would not like to set a precedent.
Well, and Commissioner Baldwin, one of the things that staff has had conversations with Ford about is that there's the balance of an inherent advantage and disadvantage right now as it comes to this one particular condition with affordable housing, that perhaps there's an advantage because we all come to an agreement on what the policy is for this individual item, and then hopefully in a few short months we've got a policy in place and someone goes, oh man, Ford got away with one on that one. Or we find out through more vetting of some policies and stuff that perhaps maybe the percentage or the fee in lieu of is in fact less than that. And so the applicant has kind of taken that into consideration, and I think has, if nothing else, regardless of what the numbers present, has shown a willingness to try to work with the town and provide something that's amenable to the board towards our overall efforts for affordable housing. So I think your comments about not setting a precedent are well taken. They will in some small regard, but I think the board certainly allowed to act in its, as a one-time capacity with this item as well. As we continue to develop our policies, this becomes just one more series of contexts that goes towards that ultimate policy that we have. And I think it's important for the board to understand that while it might provide a little bit of context and precedent, it shouldn't tie your hands for future things as well. And again, want to appreciate Ford as the applicant and trying to work with us as we kind of navigate in this interim period before we have a policy in place.
Chris, thank you. That was very well said. Couldn't agree with you more that don't have a policy, working towards a policy, asked this applicant to review our precursors to a policy as a backdrop for where we think the town is headed. So agree with you and very well put.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Chris.
You're welcome. Thank you.
I've got some questions about what some of the conditions are actually saying. So I'm looking at number 2, And it says that each lot will have an on-site or individual septic system. What's the distinction?
I'll let Charles answer that one.
Okay.
There's not an or. They all, well, there are some lots that may have off-site wastewater systems connected by an easement. All lots will be served by a septic site. There are a few lots that may, like I say, the septic site may not be contiguous to the lot itself.
And that's, I guess, nothing unusual about this part of the country.
No, it's a fairly typical solution in Chatham County.
Right. And so I would question stating on site because I think that's a condition that, I mean, somebody reads it a year from now, they'll think you meant on site.
So we can amend that language by agreement. So the septic areas that might be off site, and we can look at an example. Those septic sites will be owned by the lot. They're just physically detached, but they're owned. They're owned by the lot owner. They're not in an easement. They're not owned by the owner. So we can look
then
at
it would be on the lot.
right. It would be under ownership. Yes, it would be under ownership.
Now, would it be a contiguous lot?
Some may not. They may be separated by a roadway, so they would be connected. They would be connected by an easement.
Okay. Well, I would perhaps get some clarification on that language.
So do that in Commissioner Falco before. So you would have private septic easements in a public right of way?
No, that's not allowed by DOT.
Correct. That's why. But you said they would be disconnected from their septic from between the roadways, so it was not contiguous. That was just your response there. So how would one cross a roadway without an easement in a public right of way?
So what DOT does allow, they do allow a sleeved utility easement across the roadway, similar to a pipe culvert, similar to a gas line, similar to several other utilities, but it would in effect be a sleeved cast iron utility easement across underneath the roadway and across the roadway. They do allow that. What they don't allow would be a 15-foot easement along and inside the right-of-way parallel to the roadway from one point to another. But they do allow crossing.
But I think if we just struck on-site or to just leave it to say each will have an individual septic system, that seems like that would accommodate those situations.
Right. It does. Number 3 says provide utility easement for town for future use. What does that mean?
So one of the things that we would leave a provision for would be the possible creation or extension of sanitary sewer. That would be an easement that the town may want at some point in the future. The town may also elect to have its own utility easement for a water line where they may want to connect to a parcel to the west or to the south. And we would let the town select where the town utility public works department select where they would like those easements to be to fit their long-range plans and their long-range vision.
And so, Commissioner Fiocco, that was a comment derived and provided to the petitioner by staff to avoid any landlocking of the utilities. So basically, the requirement would be, and to be determined later, as it's kind of worded there, is that there would be an easement on paper, that the utility would not have to be extended per se, but there would be points of access to the adjacent properties, so that in the future, if the town or any other person wished to attach to our public utilities, be they water or sewer, that they could do so without the town having to go to condemnation and without that individual property owner from having to go in and negotiate and be held hostage by particularly a higher rate of someone trying to get access to a utility easement that's a public utility.
Excellent idea.
So the water is easy because that's a pressurized system. So just by virtue of our water network internal, we're going to have a stub at the water line at where we stub the roadway out to the west, so somebody could connect there. Sewer is different because it's a gravity system, and typically you run sewer lines in the low points along parallel to stream beds, and we have a provision where we can let the town select where they would like an easement along those lower areas, how they see fit, and not interrupt our given dedicated non-disturbed stream buffer either. So that's why the town needs to have some input and decide what works best to their advantage, especially with the sewer, since it's a gravity system and not a pressure system.
I think that makes a lot of sense. I just didn't get that from this language. So is there any contemplation of a water line outside of the public right-of-way or roadway, i.e. cross-country line?
I would say it would be staff's preference that all water lines would run in a public right-of-way and run parallel to all the lots and not run cross-country like a sewer line would. You know, there perhaps may be a line every once in a while that may split a lot line, you know, kind of in the building setback area that would need to traverse that way. But generally, since water can run anywhere you put a stick of pipe in the ground, we would generally want to stay in those public right-of-ways. But I'll withhold kind of final comment on that until we can see the final drawings that would come in with the future plats and site plans.
Yeah, so you would do that at preliminary plat stage, do the analysis, the study,
Yeah,
and
once we have
coordination.
some topography numbers and see how sewer would potentially run. Water, again, very easy. You can put water virtually anywhere and have it work. So, but again, we're trying to think of future problems that may exist, and now's the best time to account for those things.
Yep, it's appreciated, absolutely. Number 4, what is that trying to tell us?
That's basically saying that we plan on doing this in one phase. We're not going to phase it in 1 or 3, you know, 1, 2, or 3 phases. So, you know, after preliminary plat, before final, we'd have everything in: utilities, roads.
Okay. Has everyone checked with the fire department on the 50-foot cul-de-sac radius? For some reason, I was thinking they wanted something like 65. I don't.
Earl?
I'm not aware of they wanting a 65-foot radius.
It's really large.
A 65-foot radius exceeds the actual cul-de-sac right-of-way for paving.
Yeah.
So that's, I'm not familiar with that. The county has a 55-foot cul-de-sac radius to the right-of-way. We're following the DOT design guidelines for subdivision roads for cul-de-sac. We did have a conversation with the fire marshal, and he did review the layout, and he and I did discuss the roadways, the geometry, connectivity, many other things, and he was very satisfied with our layout, with our design, and with our widths.
Yeah, I'm not sure where. Something just alerted me when I saw the specification of a 50-foot cul-de-sac radius. Honestly, I don't think we need to specify it because you'll build it to the town and DOT standards regardless. Unless that is larger than the standards and therefore offering, you know, a larger radius.
I'm not familiar with the 65-foot radius anywhere currently.
You know, it may be the right of way.
Or a 65-foot right of way.
Yeah. Well, if the fire marshal has agreed or seen this language and understands that that's what the condition is and it's acceptable, then that's the ultimate test.
If it is larger than 50 feet, then they would have to meet the fire code standard at preliminary plat.
So, Teresa, can you say that again?
If the fire code is different than 50 feet, then they will have to meet that if it's more restrictive. If it is 65 feet, they'd have to meet that at preliminary plat approval.
Don't you think somebody's going to say, hey, I changed that condition with this zoning?
They would have to meet all subdivision requirements, including fire code, fire marshal, for preliminary plat approval.
Right. So honestly, may as well just strike this language to not have an argument in the future.
Okay.
The pocket parks and walking trails, I'd like to add a condition to those that they be handicap accessible.
Okay. That's good.
Eight has to do with the amenity center, and I think the 30th is about a third of the way through, so probably a little bit sooner than a third of the way through. What we talked about earlier is I would prefer to have the location, that centralized location, as exhibited on, well, shown on the exhibit. And it is just a bubble, no specificity of what's there other than what you've listed here, just in a bubble on a lot.
Okay.
And I think the emergency access should speak to the fact that it is able to support the weight of emergency vehicles. And number 11 says that the stream buffers will average 200 feet in width and 50-foot minimum width. So typically the 50-foot is measured from one side of the stream. So you've got a stream and two 50-footers. So what is the 200-foot measured from?
So the stream buffers are 100 feet either side of the bank.
According to who?
According to us, according to our layout.
So you're imposing a 100-foot buffer.
Correct, either side of the bank. And then within that 100, there is the 50-foot buffer that parallels the Jordan Lake rules, a 30 and a 20 adjacent to the stream bank. And the variance comes in from the width of the stream itself. Some places the stream is narrow, some places the bank-to-bank width is greater, but these are 100-foot off the bank buffers.
So why don't you just say you're having 100-foot buffers?
We can do that. We certainly can.
I think everybody would understand that.
Mm-hmm. We may want to double up on that just a little bit to make sure that it's clear that they are 100-foot buffers either side of the stream from stream bank.
Right. Typically it is measured from stream bank, but can't hurt to put the language in.
So we would be specifying 100-foot bank. We would be specifying 100-foot buffers measured from the bank of the stream either side of the stream.
I think, yeah, each stream will have two sides, so probably.
Different people make reference to stream buffers in different ways. There are places where people make reference to a 50-foot buffer or a 100-foot buffer, and the intention is for it to be a total width.
Yeah.
And that is in some ordinances and some language. So that would be the thing where the specificity be required to make sure it's not misconstrued. has a
Gotcha.
total buffer width of 100 feet. Total buffer width is 200 plus an average. Total width.
Well, I think if you say 100 foot from either stream bank.
We're good with that.
Okay. On number 12, talk about a 30-foot vegetated and undisturbed setback. I would recommend changing that to buffer. And along entire boundary, I believe your intent is the exterior boundary of the original parcel.
Correct.
Yeah, might want to insert that word exterior. And I think you should also, or it would be appropriate to provide an exception for vehicular rights of ways and or easements.
Probably a question for Jeff. Jeff, does the ordinance right now, does it specify proper encroachments into buffers?
Well, we don't really require this type of buffer, like a green belt around subdivisions. So we wouldn't, our ordinance wouldn't necessarily speak to that.
Okay. I know, I think to what Commissioner Fiocco is referencing is typically there's certain types of uses in a certain fashion in which someone can do it. It basically says that right-of-ways or access, or, you know, I've even seen, you know, BMPs for stormwater and such, that encroachments have to basically go at perpendicular at 90 degrees. So they get across as quick as possible. But you basically don't encapsulate the development where someone goes, oh, well, you have an entrance into the development. You voided your zoning. And so I think kind of allowing those types of encroachments and to say that they need to be perpendicular so they get through in their most expedient fashion would be appropriate to add to that one. I think that probably is what Commissioner Fiocco was getting at.
Yep. Mm-hmm. Yes, indeed, Chris. Thank you. You know, thinking about, so I think it's our policy that new sewer easements and other utility easements are accompanied with greenway rights. I think we should add that as a condition, so that when we are contemplating where the sewer outfall might be, that it would also include greenway rights for the town too.
Can we add that to condition number 3?
Yeah. Well, I think so. I don't know if the applicant thinks so.
To y'all forward.
I mean, yeah, I think it's fine. I was just reading that one again to see if it would kind of be general enough to include that, but it doesn't. It just says to be determined by Pittsboro Utility Public Works staff. So if they would determine that, but I'm happy to add that. We can add that to number 3.
Yeah, and it would functionally just be a generic statement specifying that any utility easement throughout the development would also have both the ability to be utility easement, but also a greenway easement as well to within that same dimension. So if we have,
so your standard sanitary sewer easement is 20 feet wide, so it would parallel. It would be coincidental with that. It would be 20
correct.
feet wide.
It would be concurrent with that same. So basically, the I'll call it the subterranean right of and the surface right to enter that and to have the easement underneath it. Generally 20 feet with the line centered in the middle of that 20 feet. That in addition to having our ability to access that to maintain the utility easement, they would also have the ability to install a surface on top of that utility easement that will be open to the public for pedestrian access or bike access.
Yeah, we could add that. I'm fine with that.
And then I think my only other one is the change from 6% to 8% for the affordables.
And what are we saying that means in terms of that's like 9.2 lots. So what does that work out to in dollars at 85,000 per?
Well, I think that's up to the board to decide whether is the math derived from the number of literal units. Obviously, you can't provide 0.28 of a unit. However, dollars do divide that way. And so is it 85,000 times 9, or is it 85,000 times 9.28, or any other variation in between or outside of that? I think I'm sure Ford would may have a comment to that as well, but from the perspective of seeking enforcement on it, I think any of those things can be done. It's just whatever the board and the petitioner can agree to.
Well, we could, so 116 lots times 85,000 and then 8% of that.
%8 of the dollar amount.
Right. Mm-hmm.
So that's, I think that works out to be the same as the other, but it's that's 788,800.
Yeah. And I'm comfortable with the 8% of the lots. I mean, if we go higher than that, then we're not doing 8%. It's a little bit higher than 8%.
Well, I think we can do the math that way. Works for me. But I do want I want to get the money into the town of Pittsburgh's Affordable Housing Fund. And I would like for the payment to be no later than 6 months after final plat approval without having the money escrowed. Well, no, the money can be escrowed, fine.
Yeah, honestly, Mr. Fiocco, I put that in there. I tried to be as general as I could with where the funds would go, just knowing that there wasn't a program. So wherever,
yeah,
safe and it's going towards some place that we're all agreeing where it's going, we're okay.
Right. Now, so I think we should just have it go to the town of Pittsburgh Affordable Housing Fund. And I think in our budget, we have a line item for affordable housing. And I think that's the place we would put it. And I don't think we need to escrow it. I think the payment would be made no later than 6 months after the final plat approval.
Yeah, from my perspective of managing the budget on behalf of the town, I would say probably what we would do is create a capital project fund with a project ordinance specified that these monies will be used towards affordable housing ventures. That could be infrastructure projects to support affordable housing. It could be the purchase of land. It could be providing money to the county's program. It could be any litany of things that the town wishes to do. It works kind of like as an escrow. That project fund has its own, caretaking that we look at there. So, and as I spoke with Ford before and kind of described some of these things, and again, he was very open about saying, however the town wants to do it, we'll be happy to provide that, whether it's a third-party escrow or anything of the like. As he said before, he said, we're just passionate about affordable housing. We want to make sure that's done in a way the town can manage that money as they see fit. So I think that would be our preference. And then that way, each year with the budget, we can look at appropriations out of that fund and look at projects we can use those proceeds towards to provide meaningful impact. And ultimately, some great economies of scale, I think, and using those funds towards some real efforts to provide the affordable housing that we seek.
Agreed, Chris. I think it should be as versatile as it can to make it that much valuable or more valuable about accomplishing the goal. And that's all that I have to say on the matter.
Any other comments or questions or discussion?
I'll just say I really appreciate Teresa doing this live. I know it's difficult, but it's really helpful to to make sure we're all tracking the same changes as we talk through this.
And just want to make sure that everything's agreeable to both the applicant and the Board of Commissioners.
Yeah, I'm just looking at it now. I was looking at the actual packet. I didn't notice you were doing this, so that's great. Thank you for that.
Just a little note of from the fire department spectrum of it. We hopefully will be having a ladder truck up at that station that's right off of 087 also.
Oh, that's just north of here?
Beg your pardon?
The one that's just north of Russell's Chapel?
Yes, sir. That's where our plan is to have it stationed. And that's why I think the fire code in these cul-de-sacs is 55, but I would want to double check that with a ladder truck.
55, okay. And I felt like there was something that it wasn't just 50.
The NCDOT specs, which were just updated in July of 2020, specify the right of way at 50 for a local subdivision street. So unless this has been classified as anything else, that standard is pretty current. I just looked that up while we were sitting here. So again, I think with the way Teresa has put that down is functionally that we'll have the ability to spec that out as we get further into the process if the board wishes to approve this item, to make sure, be it 50 feet or 100 feet, the condition will persist, and if it's required, then that's what will have to be done.
Right.
Teresa, do we have something in here that talks about showing the clubhouse location?
There is one that says centrally located, number 8.
Right, and one of the things I wanted to do was to actually have a bubble on the plan that says this is that location.
Have you decided on where that location is? If it was lot 109 or?
I will leave that up to the applicant.
So when would you want to see that bubble on the plan? I mean, is this like preliminary plat stuff? Because by then we'll have it already designated, or do you want to see that prior to preliminary plat approval?
I think it would be appropriate to be at this level.
And we can add it on the condition if the
Yeah.
applicant's okay with that.
That it would be shown on the map. Because
And
I
that
think,
yes, sir, that
yeah.
we can make sure as staff that it gets updated on the map.
right. I think at the end of the day, if in fact we approve this project or this zoning with these conditions, there's still going to be some vetting of the language with, Mr. Messick, and I'm sure Chris and planning, and applicant, to make sure everybody agrees on what was agreed upon.
So I'll defer to Charles to commit more to that at the moment.
Yeah, so we will update this document, the graphical document, to coincide with the final signed conditions. Yes.
So the emergency, I'm sorry, let me go back to number 9 about the emergency access. It says gate will be accessible only by emergency personnel post-construction. What does post-construction mean? When does that occur?
So after the project is completed, all the irons are in the ground, all the utilities are completed, roadways are completed. We are then off for our final plat approval. And at final plat approval, that easement turns into the emergency access way and not a construction entrance. Construction entrance is only during the time of construction of roadways, utilities, etc.
Okay, so it will convert upon the approval and recording of the final plat.
Correct.
Okay. Make a motion to approve this. Well, I find this,
Commissioner Fielko, one thing that on condition 12,
oh,
I think we wanted the word setback deleted.
well, we're going to change it to buffer, right?
Correct. Well, Teresa has buffer in there in red, but I think we'll strike through on the.
Oh, I see. Yeah.
And then in the parentheticals you have there, Teresa, with the exception of easements and right-of-ways, I think probably an addition there of saying functionally that said encroachments shall run perpendicular to the buffer.
As much as practicable.
We're all staring at your spelling skills, Teresa, as you try to type in front of the whole group. You have the unenviable job of trying to spell in front of everybody else in red writing.
Well, I'd like to take a moment to share some thoughts. Jay, I appreciate you bringing up the question of satellite annexation. And I confess that throughout the project, I've had some discomfort with kind of how far out it is, because I do feel like, and on many occasions, this board has been striving to encourage development in Pittsburgh in a more centralized way and create density in the inner part of town. That said, I hadn't really wanted to bring it up because it's so apparent that Mr. Dupree is working very hard to accommodate the concerns and the sentiment of this board on so many different issues. And in particular, I'm just really heartened, Ford, by your responsiveness to the very concept of an affordable housing participation. And your demeanor, your
that new language looks fine to me.
Yeah, your everything about the conversation on affordable housing has just been remarkable, and I'm deeply appreciative of your willingness to engage. So I support the project, and notwithstanding my concerns about sprawl, I think the contribution towards affordable housing is so significant that this is something that I think is very important. I think the other commissioners for their
I'm
efforts.
having a hard time hearing you, Mr. Bonitz.
Okay. Are others able to hear me?
Yes.
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
I thank my fellow commissioners tonight for working so hard on these particular details. And I think that we've got a set of conditions that are really well done.
The last thing I just heard was really well done. I heard nothing else. I don't know what happened to my system, but I was sitting here and I'm like, why? No, I can't hear anybody.
Ford, I was sending a lot of kudos your way, and you can listen to the recording later, but thank you.
All right, well, thank you for that.
Teresa, the other thing about number 13 now is that we're going to have the money go to the Pittsburgh Affordable Housing Fund and then strike all the remainder until the last sentence where the payment would be made. Yeah. Well, I'll make a motion that we find the rezoning is not consistent with the land use plan.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, unanimous.
And I make a motion that we approve the rezoning with the updated conditions discussed this evening.
Second. All right. All those in favor?
Mr.
Aye.
Mayor,
Aye.
we also need to amend the future land use map.
Yep.
I'm sorry, can I get who did the second on the approval of the rezoning?
Ship.
Thank you.
So I would ask that Commissioner Fioco's, and I would defer if someone thinks it's some different order, but well, I think as part of the approval, we have to also amend the future land use maps designation for this subject property to thereby
Yep.
make it consistent.
Is this 160D coming up?
No, this is a previous.
Okay.
So
The first resolution in the packet adopting a consistency statement. It says that it's not consistent with the plan, but that approval of the rezoning request number 2 is also deemed an amendment to the plan. So that would be the one that you have to adopt, the first resolution. Because both resolutions say that it does not meet the land use plan, is not consistent with the land use plan. But the first one says that you're amending the land use plan.
Okay.
That's why you could just say which statement is either for approval of the rezoning request or denial of the rezoning request.
correct. So I think there's a couple ways you can go about it. And I was thinking that if the first vote is to say it's inconsistent.
Yes.
And then because the second vote could be a denial and would not require an amendment. And so if you vote to approve, then it is included and somewhat embedded into your motion to approve. There would be a comment that this also thereby, I guess, resolves that inconsistency and amends the future land use for this parcel to the low density residential away from rural residential to thereby make your approval consistent. Does that make sense?
It does. So there was a pre-prepared resolution, and I should have used that.
Teresa, we're looking at the resolution that has 3 items,
Yes,
1,
sir.
2, and 3.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
I'm trying to get to it. I don't know where it is. There's a lot of paper in this one.
Teresa, for staff's sake, which motion would you prefer to have the amendment to the future land use plan in? Do you want it in the motion 1 or motion 2?
So, if they were to adopt the resolution adopting a consistency statement for amendment to the zoning ordinance, it's the first or resolution that within it, number 1 says that it's not consistent with the land use plan, and then number 2 is that this rezoning request is also deemed an amendment. So, if they make a motion that it's not consistent, that they can still adopt the first resolution.
Agreed, Chris, and I see your point about it being sort of out of order, but in this, I think we would do something different if we weren't going to approve the project as well, but I think in this case, we can use the resolution as written here for the consistency statement and then approve.
Okay, I just want to make it abundantly clear that the adoption of said resolution also includes the land use amendment
Yes.
as well. So I just want, so Teresa and Commissioner Shiv, to that end, we'll accept the motion that's already passed on that from Mr. Fioco, seconded by Mr. Shiv, to have recognize that it was inconsistent. We have then amended it accordingly, and now we have a motion on the floor, motion number 2, to approve it with the conditions set forth. Motion by Mr. Fioco, seconded by Mr. Shipp, and now we are in the discussion phase of that, and the mayor has asked for a vote
Yes.
to formally either accept or have that motion fail. Is that correct?
Correct.
Correct.
Did we call for the vote already? I think we did.
We did.
And we voted unanimous?
Well,
Yes.
I think I stopped it before it happened.
Oh, okay.
Let's
Okay.
do a roll call.
Why don't you do it again?
Yeah.
Why don't you do it again?
I wanted to see if Paul was paying attention, so I just decided to throw a wrench on this.
It's the first resolution in your package. It has three parts to it, and you should probably vote again, just to be clear.
you're right. Do I hear?
So moved.
Is there a second?
I did second.
All right. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
It's unanimously approved. Okay. All right.
Thank you
Moving
all.
on. The next item is had been moved from the consent agenda. It has to do with the charging for the charging stations here in town. And John, you had asked that that be moved to the new business section.
We made it number 2, I think.
We did, yes. That's number 2. Oh, I'm sorry. We do the master stormwater first. I'm sorry, I jumped ahead. Item 1 is the master stormwater item. And who is presenting on that?
Mr. Mass is going to take the lead for that for us.
I guess it's me, Mr. Mayor.
All right.
Members of the board and Mr. Mayor, the master agreement was included in your agenda package, and I sent to you this afternoon a copy of the supplemental stormwater agreement that would supposed to have been attached as an exhibit to the master agreement. But in any event, this is a similar process to what we used for the master encroachment agreement within Chatham Park that would require supplemental agreements as phases of the development occur. But this stormwater agreement is intended to certify to the town and to the prospective purchasers of property in Chatham Park, both residential and commercial, that these stormwater devices have been converted from erosion control devices during the period of construction to the permanent stormwater control devices for the future. And this is the master agreement is intended to cover all of the property in Chatham Park and would be supplemented as each phase comes online and the stormwater devices are being converted. I know there's been some questions about it, and the folks from Chatham Park and Withers and Ravenel, who are the engineers on the stormwater side of the project, are on the computer to answer any questions that you all might have. Like I said, this is substantially similar to the process we use for encroachment agreements. So if you have any questions, I'll be glad to try to answer them.
Okay. Any questions for Mr. Messick? Okay. Any comments, discussion?
Paul, one of the questions I had this afternoon was whether this agreement, the O&M agreement, in any way modified the need for these SEMs to be inspected on an annual basis and reported to the town and Chatham Park. And for the record, your answer was no. This does not remove that requirement.
Correct. The inspection reports still have to be done.
Yeah, and that's a requirement the town has on every SCM that gets constructed and certified as built correctly. So we know from the beginning of the SEM's life, it was built correctly, and as it goes on an annual basis, engineers are required to visit the device and inspect it and report on its condition and advise the owner, the responsible party, for any maintenance that is required. Of course, the owner should be doing the maintenance during the course of the year, mowing and trimming and making sure the device is solid if it's a above ground device. And so this is something unique to Chatham Park that makes the Residential Owners Association responsible for all these activities. But it's the same kind of thing that we require of all owners of SEMs in town.
Yes, sir.
Commissioner Fiocco, when you say engineers inspecting that, is that a town engineer or a engineer hired by the owner?
Engineer hired by the owner that then reports to the town, and then the town has the ability to go review the inspection report. This is fairly typical fare throughout North Carolina, where budgets are tight and rely on professional engineers to do the work and report their findings because they have an oath to public safety.
Okay. And Jeff, how do we track that process?
That's a good question. If we should be having an inventory of all SCMs that are currently in town and then would be in operation moving forward. And through that inventory process, there would be a date associated with it that the yearly maintenance or the yearly inspection would be due. And if things were working well, that program was working well, we would have staff sort of alert the property owner or the developer, hey, within at the 10-month time frame or 11-month time frame, our inspectors would say, hey, look, it looks like it's coming due. You're going to need to get this to us by a certain date. I can't say that that's currently happening today because we don't currently have an inspector that's doing that type of work for us now. If it was working well, we would be out and reminding folks of when these certifications are due and checking up on them.
Okay, so we don't have the program in place, or we don't have the personnel to do the program?
Personnel. I don't have personnel on staff who can go out and inspect SEMs.
Sure.
Yeah.
But under this scenario, the town is not going to have to inspect the SCMs. It's going to have to review the inspection reports that it receives from the association or the owner, as the case may be.
And that's how we currently handle projects outside of Chatham Park. We don't have personnel to review the report either, so we would have to outsource that or hire people to do that work.
Hey.
I have just one comment. Kind of go maybe to Jeff. I'm not really sure, but I'm just a little, I know that Elizabeth did a lot of work on our stormwater amendment and agreement with Chatham Park, and I'm just concerned that we do not have an engineer on staff to oversee this. Should we have some hydrostructures or somebody look at this?
At this agreement that's before us tonight, I do know that while Elizabeth was here, and she has been gone for several months now, that she was working with Chatham Park, specifically Hunter, on all aspects of stormwater, including this agreement. Now, the final version that's before you, obviously she didn't see that, but they were working very diligently towards this agreement while she was here. And I'm not sure what more we would gather from hiring someone to review this at this time. I understand where your concern is coming from, but in this aspect, I do feel like there was someone, Elizabeth in particular, who was looking out for the town while she was here. And I don't think the version that's before you tonight is much different than what she was seeing late last year or earlier this year.
Mr. Farrell, that's my understanding as well.
Well, you can definitely tell it was wrote by a lawyer or engineer.
Both.
Sorry.
Mr. Messick, I am curious if you could help us find in the document a couple of things. I am trying to work through Chatham Park's responses, which I only saw at about 5:30 today. But specifically, I'd love to know where in the 15 pages of text we'll find the stipulation that tree wells and similar stormwater control measures are the responsibility of the property owner.
The tree well issue is covered already in the existing encroachment agreement, the master encroachment agreement. And it says in there that those tree wells are within the street right of way that will be maintained by the town, except that the tree wells are going to be maintained by Chatham Park. So that's already been done.
Okay.
And it's not in this document, it's in the other document that's been done several months ago.
Okay. And how about those drains and pipes that happen to cross under town streets?
Those are also going to be encroachments within the street right of way. The only parts of the stormwater system that will be part of the street right of way are the culverts and the curbs, where the surface water runoff from the street flows in through the curb cut into the storm drain. That'll have to be maintained by the town because that's part of the street system. But the example given in the explanation involving the vineyard project, where there's an SCM on one side of the road that flows into the SCM on the opposite side of the road, that pipe will be maintained by the association, is my understanding. That goes under the road, but that will be an encroachment and is allowed as a part of the street project.
And that is
Mr. Freeman,
and that type of encroachment is specifically addressed in the supplemental encroachment agreement? Excuse me, the master.
I don't know that we have a supplemental encroachment agreement for the vineyard yet.
I meant to say master encroachment agreement.
Well, any encroachment that is not town, it's not a part of the town acceptance of the improvement will have to be covered by the encroachment agreement.
Okay.
Mr. Messick, could I address that?
Certainly.
For the record, this is Ken Eagle, attorney for Chatham Park Investors, 105 Weston Estates Way, Cary, North Carolina. Our understanding is that the things that you described, the inlets and the culverts, anything in the actual street right of way, including the pipes, would be town owned and maintained improvements because it's in the street right of way. Now, there are specific things such as tree wells, which if we would propose to use those, which we have done on Russet Run Road and Freedom Drive, then that would be part of the engineering plans, and we would also have to have a supplemental encroachment agreement to specifically describe those devices that the association would maintain, which is what we've done where we have those devices so far, like I mentioned, Russet Run and Freedom Parkway. But that would all be part of the engineering plans. It would all be, and if we weren't going to maintain those, the town might say you can't have them. But we are, tree wells, if we're going to propose them to be in the right of way, then the association is going to maintain them, because those are, the distinction is the tree wells are a stormwater treatment device. For the various reasons, the way they're built and the purpose that they serve. And pipes that are in the road are just conveying stormwater from one location to another. Just like it is anywhere in Pittsburgh. If you've got stormwater pipes, you may be getting stormwater that runs off from the street itself. You may be getting stormwater that runs off from the adjoining property, but it all goes into the same pipe. You don't have separate sets of pipe for streets and for the lots adjoining the streets. It's all part of the street infrastructure that is there. And Hunter, if you or Robbie can, offer anything to help with explaining this, I'll ask you to jump in and do so. But that's the way I understand it.
Mr. Eagle, this is Chris. So perhaps to maybe clarify or simplify Mr. Bonds' question, as I understand it, is that the agreement contemplates that there will be infrastructure, both publicly and privately maintained in our right-of-ways that go throughout Chatham Park. That the infrastructure that is, I'll say, intentionally incidental to the roadway for that public road, i.e. catch basins, curb inlets, and the piping necessary to facilitate that will be publicly maintained. However, pipe infrastructure that runs perpendicular to the road that is not connecting to that, I'll say the stormwater main, but is piped under the road or piped into the tree wells is not to be publicly maintained. Those are privately maintained. Is that correct?
I'm going to get Robbie or Hunter to address that, I think.
Okay.
Whichever one of them wants to do that.
This is Hunter Freeman, Withers Ravenel. I believe that summary in general is accurate. Obviously, everything's going to be a case-by-case scenario when we get into the design plan specific to a project. But yes, Chris, if we're conveying water to the tree well in a pipe, that I think the expectation would be that pipe would be privately maintained and covered by an encroachment agreement of some kind. If we're tying the tree well into the stormwater infrastructure that's part of the road, that would be town maintained infrastructure at that point. The tree well itself would be privately maintained by Chatham Park, but the conveyance infrastructure of the pipe system downstream of that, in that case for a tree well, would likely be town maintained, as it is on Freedom Parkway. The encroachment includes only the tree wells for private maintenance. The other inlets and larger pipes, I'll say 15-inch in diameter and larger, because they're not discharging into the tree wells. They're conveying water down the street after it's been discharged from the tree wells. Those are publicly maintained in my, as far as I know.
And this is Robbie Evan, Withers Ravenel. I'll just add to that the way we're looking at it is if it's just a conveyance within a street, then that would be maintained by the town of Pittsburgh. But if you got a device, again, a tree well, a bioretention area that may be in a median, if it's providing treatment, and not just conveyance, then that is maintained by the Chatham Park Residential Homeowners Association. So that's the distinction. You're going to have different devices where, just like with Thales, there is they've got their own site. SCM is treated stormwater. It comes into the street and then it flows, I don't know, maybe 500 feet, and then it's conveyed into the another downstream SCM within Vineyards and Chatham Park. And this is typical. I mean, that's what I was going to add with Hunter, what he said. I mean, this is typical in any municipality I'm aware of, and Hunter can, add to that. But otherwise, you would be running parallel pipes. Some within the street just going to treat the stormwater, and some that that are not. And in most cases, you're not going to have that because most of your stormwater devices are going to be next to your stream buffers. If anything, what you're going to have is storm piping coming from the road, then going into a SEM that's going to be treated and maintained by the Chatham Park Association. So that's just one. I mean, there's multiple examples, but I think it's key is to talk about conveyance versus treatment of the device itself.
Robbie and Hunter, thank you for that. What about the, I'll say the outlet structure? So you have a tree well that outlets into the, I'll call it the public main. That outlet structure, is that privately or publicly maintained?
That would be privately maintained.
Okay, so I guess the presumption would be that the public main would be sized and designed accordingly to take all the flow that is coming from, be it public infrastructure or private infrastructure, into those lines.
That's right.
And the conveyances thereof, and able to run downhill. Correct.
That's correct.
That is correct.
Does that help, Mr. Bonnets?
It does.
Great.
Thank you.
And for all clarity, Mr. Messick, do you agree that the agreement speaks to that condition?
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Okay. Further questions, discussion?
I'll make a motion to approve the agreement and note that in the first paragraph of the agreement, we've got an agreement misspelled.
We can fix that.
Yeah, excellent.
Okay. All right. Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Would you raise your hands again, please, if you're voting yes?
Aye.
1, 2, 3, 4. Okay.
To be clear, I'm abstaining because I did not have adequate time to review these documents.
Okay. So the motion carries 4 and 1 abstention. Okay. Now we're moving into item number 2, which is now item number 2 in new business, which is the proposal for charging at the charging stations that we currently have and will have in the future around town.
Yes, thank you. And thank you again, board, for agreeing to have a bit of discussion on this. Thank you so much to staff for the hard work on this. It may seem like a small thing. The dollars are not a big part of our budget, but we've gone to the trouble of kind of planting a flag of welcome to electric vehicle drivers in town. And so I want to make sure that we're aware of what we're doing in regards to the consistency of that welcome statement, And it occurs to me that Commissioner Shipp might be able to weigh in specifically on this. The feedback that I got when I reached out to electric vehicle owners was the suggestion that by having the hourly parking fee kick in immediately, that might be a bit of a deterrent or discouragement. What I think we're really aiming for is to try and disincentivize people from parking all night or for parking for long periods of time at these charging stations. So I might suggest that we think about that, or staff think about that, maybe something like implementing the hourly parking fee beginning an hour or 2 after the initiation of charging. Commissioner Shipp, you're the only electric vehicle owner on the board right now, so I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I don't know. For one, I don't know what flexibility we have for pricing in there. I'd say it's becoming more of the exception to find free charging stations than the norm like it used to be, which is completely reasonable. So I don't know the best way to do it. I agree. I mean, in general, at all charging stations, you want people to leave as soon as they're done with charging, so that it, in theory, frees it up for additional vehicles. So I'm not sure if there's a better pricing structure that would accomplish that, but I don't think at our charging stations currently, I don't think we have that issue either, honestly. But.
And I would clarify for the board that the intent of the fee is not to be punitive to anyone. That is, if you would like to park there all night long, that's completely okay with us. Ours is the fact that the life cycle on these charging stations is 5 to 7 years. These were originally funded through a Duke Energy grant. And so Duke Energy, gives you the gateway into that type of field. And then as you go to replace them, the technology's actually improved substantially. A lot of these were done. Duke Energy started this, I believe, in 2012, 2013. And a lot of communities had these, and the entry price was dependent on how many chargers came off of it and such, and how you oriented it. You were looking at, if I recall the numbers correctly, it was $10,000 to $15,000 for one charging unit. The cost has actually dropped almost in half. The cost is between it's about $6,500 to $7,000. So either 25% or half, depending on which model you had. So the technology has greatly improved. I think part of that is because the prevalence of these vehicles has greatly increased. So the economy of scale has certainly helped that. And so what we're looking to do is just, and that's why the fee is really just to cover our basic energy costs. We're not looking to really make money with this. You have the 15 cents per kilowatt hour, and then the $1 per hour for the availability charge. And hopefully over the period of a year, we get our energy costs compensated for or reimbursed. We might get 1,000 hours or more, hopefully more, on those chargers. And so over a 5 to 6 year period, we can then replace those chargers with efficient equipment. And, we felt like it was probably best to do that now when we have 2 chargers. As I stated to the board before, when we have 50 to 100 of these things around town, as you know, Chatham Park and every home they have is supposed to have a 240 volt car charger in all the homes if they have a garage. And so I think we're going to see a huge uptick in these. This will definitely be a conversation that Commissioner Fiocco and I will be having with Main Street Pittsboro, and how we integrate some of these pieces of infrastructure into our downtown and where it's most appropriate into that downtown fabric of. And I think that's going to be one of the unique things that we have. And I've spoken to a lot of people about that, of the funkiness of Pittsboro, to have the historic quality of downtown, but also have the modern amenities and the touches that you might get with an electric charger. So I think we're all excited about that. So again, staff at, Heather and I, Heather, our finance director, we had a lot of conversation because we feel like it's the board's desire to encourage these things. And so when we're looking at either a 100% subsidy of saying, hey, come charge whenever you want. And we see people, it's right outside our office window. So I see everyone who comes and charges up. Again, we want to encourage that. It sits idle and empty a lot. And so we hope that the price and the fee is not a barrier to entry. And so we think a general charge up costs you about $4. And hopefully that's perhaps cheaper than you can do it at the house. Certainly cheaper than the initial investment of installing this infrastructure at your house, if you're able to come and drop off at one of our locations. So I think that's part of the important thing is that we're trying to make this a perpetual program as much as anything else, and not really a revenue source for the town, and not a barrier to entry at the same time.
Mr. Kennedy, I really appreciate that rationale. And in light of that, unless there are others who have strong feelings on it, I will withdraw my concern, and thank you for pushing us to have infrastructure pay for itself. That's exactly the kind of development we need. So, thank you, sir.
Yes, sir.
I move that we accept this fee as written.
Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Motion passes unanimously.
Very good. Thank you.
Thank you.
Now, we have a closed session on the
Would
agenda.
it be possible to take a 5-minute break before we go into closed session?
I was going to suggest that. I would suggest we
Thank
take
you.
take a 5-minute break, and then remember when we come back, you've got another link to go into the closed, and then another one to come back out of closed. So Cassie sent the original log on.
The one that I sent for the close, I closed it out and you just go back into this original one.
Right. Okay.
So should we move to go to closed session and then we take our break going into that so we don't have to
Yes.
come back here and move?
Okay, great. So when we
Okay.
come back from break, then we're going to.
I would clarify that you were, per the agenda, you were going into closed session
Right.
to pursuant to 143-318-11A6.
Yes, and we will, when we come out of break, then we will, you need to click in the Zoom link that Cassie sent to go into closed. Okay?
So we'll meet back here and then go.
I was suggesting that we go now and then take a break in the closed session, essentially.
So we can leave now, go into closed.
Go into
Yes.
closed,
Got it.
take our break,
You
right?
make a motion to go into close and then take a break, correct?
I'll make the motion to go into.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Who's
All
second?
right.
I'm sorry, who's second?
I did.
Field?
Yep.
Okay.
All right, see you in close. Leave here.